Orders of the day, government orders, Government Bill Senate, resuming consideration at second reading of Bill S-8, an act to amend the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, to make consequential amendments to other acts, and to amend the Immigration and Refugee Protection Regulations.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Get a glass of water or okay. Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. And it's such a pleasure to be able to rise and speak to legislation that really reinforces something that has been discussed and debated in the House now for quite a while. And that is in regards to two political regimes that are out there and the impact that they are actually having on the world today, Madam Speaker. You know, we hear a great deal from members of the opposition talking about the issue of inflation. And when I talk about the issue of inflation, you look around the world in terms of where inflation rates are at, Madam Speaker, I often will stand and I will talk about the reality of what's happening in the world that in part is causing inflation to occur. And that is in regards to the two regimes that I would like to spend a little bit of time talking about and why it is that this legislation is before us today. The war in Ukraine has caused so much hardship in many different ways. We have seen the Ukrainian community not only in Ukraine but around the world. And I believe if Canada is not number 2, it might be number 3 behind the United States in terms of Ukrainian heritage community, in terms of size. And I say that because typically, whatever takes place in Ukraine, whether it's today or back in 2014 with the Maidan or Independence Square, or the independence of Ukraine back in the early 90s, Madam Speaker. When things happen in Ukraine, the people of Canada genuinely care. And it shouldn't surprise anyone when you take a look at the demographics of Canada. Over 1.3 million people of Ukrainian heritage call Canada home. And it's not just people of Ukrainian heritage that have made that connection. In good part, Madam Speaker, it's the neighbors, it's the working environment, it's our educational institutions, where you will find a great deal of discussion in regards to Ukraine. I'm much more familiar with the Ukraine and what's happening in Ukraine than I am, I must admit, in terms of Iran, and I want to be able to amplify, because I know that there are so many people in my home province, in fact, my city of Winnipeg, that are following the issue of the war in Ukraine, or war that's taking place in Europe. Madam Speaker, you know, this weekend I will be hosting at one of our local Ukrainian churches a special lunch. And there is no doubt that the number one issue that I will be addressing on Sunday afternoon is going to be the illegal war that is taking place in Ukraine. In Manitoba alone, we have seen, and I've asked for some numbers, but based on community numbers that have been provided to me, well over 12,000, and some have suggested as high as 15,000 people that have been displaced from Ukraine that are now living and residing in the province of Manitoba. And I can tell you, when you take a look at the numbers and you drive around, whether it's the city of Winnipeg or it's going into the rural communities, whether it's Dauphin, or even take a short drive out to the community of Gimli, and what you will see is substantial support in the forms of Ukrainian flags being flown, where you'll see offices in windows and homes in windows in support of what's in support of Ukraine, Madam Speaker. I say this because if you take a look in terms of what has taken place over the last year and how the world has really come together, not just a Ukrainian community in Ukraine, in Canada, in the United States, but Ukrainians around the world have come together in solidarity and the friends of Ukraine, people that are not necessarily of Ukrainian heritage, recognizing that, like Canada and its allied countries, we need to be there for Ukraine in a very real, intangible way. I remember from a personal perspective where I was standing up and speaking inside the House, where I was talking about how we should be providing support for Ukraine. Maybe about a year ago, maybe just over a year ago, Madam Speaker. And the Prime Minister had indicated, don't forget lethal weapons to me. It is important that if you take a look in terms of the types of supports that we are putting in place for Ukraine in working with the allied countries, that it is really making a difference. And a part of that support goes directly to the legislation that we have today, Madam Speaker. The legislation deals with one aspect of the things that we are doing to show the world that Canada is behind Ukraine. And it deals with the issue of sanctions. Madam Speaker, when the war broke out in Ukraine, there were many demands put up on the government of Canada. And we didn't have to necessarily hear them, as we had ministers taking their responsibilities and already taking actions, Madam Speaker. But we literally had thousands of people throughout the country stand up in the forms of rallies saying, what can we do as a nation to protect the interests of Ukraine? And ideas such as humanitarian aid. And I remember when we said that we would match Canadians' contributions to humanitarian aid, and it was, I believe it was a $12 million commitment that we had made. I might be out by a little bit there, Madam Speaker. But it was just a matter of days, if not weeks, in which that cap had already been hit. So we had to expand that cap because Canadians were wanting to see humanitarian aid. When it came to the military, I believe it was 35,000 plus Ukrainian soldiers that had benefited by Canadians, our Canadian forces and the training that we provided. We have provided all forms of ammunitions and other types of supports. In fact, I believe it was just recently Ukraine has actually received one of our tanks, the Leopard tank, Madam Speaker, I believe it was. And that's very recent. And what you will find is that it's in multiple numbers, in many different things that we are actually providing. And the point of this, Madam Speaker, is to recognize that whether it is those lethal weapons, humanitarian aid, or providing leadership with our allied countries so that there would be a united front in taking on Russia, Madam Speaker. And this is one of the areas in which Canada has made significant headway. And that's on the sanctions. it is having an impact, Madam Speaker. Canada has taken a very strong approach in regards to a multitude of tools that we can use in order to clearly indicate that what's happening in Europe today, this unprovoked, inhumane war that Russia has commenced on Ukraine a year ago, that there would be consequences. And the people of Russia are in fact starting to see the consequences of economic sanctions that have been put on to the country and sanctions for the regime itself. And when we think about that, Madam Speaker, Canada will continue to be there for Ukraine in a time of need in regards to holding Russia accountable. Banning close associates and key supporters of the Putin regime, including those responsible for Russia's unprovoked aggression in Ukraine, from entering our country, is one of the many ways in which we are holding Russia accountable for its crimes. We will continue to exhaust all options to uphold freedom and democracy, Madam Speaker. So when you take a look at Bill S-8, what you will see is that there are amendments that are being proposed that are needed to align Canada's sanctions in inadmissibility frameworks to ensure that those responsible for Russia's aggression and already subjected to sanctions are inadmissible to Canada, Madam Speaker. Individuals and entities who have been sanctioned for their support of terrorism and systemic and gross human rights violations are inadmissible to Canada. The changes that we are putting in place will allow the Canada Border Control Agency to deny entry to and ultimately remove sanctioned individuals, and will allow immigration, refugees, and Canadian citizenship officials to actually deny visas. Once in force, Madam Speaker, these amendments to the IRPA will apply to all foreign nationals subject to sanctions by Canada and any accompanying family members. Madam Speaker, in what we're referencing is take a look at many of the actions through this war that are taking place today or have taken place in the last 10, 11 months in Ukraine. We hear about human rights violations. Just yesterday, we were talking about the notwithstanding clause in the House and highlighted the Canada Charter of Rights and Freedoms and Canadian values. If we were to apply Canadian values to what's taking place in Ukraine, it is very obvious. You could show that in a classroom of grade 1 students. You can sit down with a child and be able to explain it to a child, and the child will understand that very clearly, Madam Speaker. That's how blatant it is in Ukraine, in a time of war, and the type of actions that Russia has taken. We can cite specific examples of things such as mass murders, to rape, to all forms of seduction and torture that are taking place, Madam Speaker, in Ukraine. So it's fairly easy to put forward that particular argument. If I was to change channels and talk about Iran and the regime in Iran, because even though I spend most of my time talking about Ukraine, the legislation also applies to the regime in Iran. And one can only imagine in terms of what it is that in particular women today have to put up with regards to what's taking place in the Iranian regime. Again, Canada will continue to hold the Iranian regime to account for its crimes and human rights abuses. We stand in solidarity with the women and demonstrators across Iran who are advocating for their rights and freedoms. That is why we are implementing the strongest sanctions in the world, Madam Speaker, which include banning senior IRGC operatives from Canada. The government continues to be unwavering in our commitment to keep Canadians safe by taking all appropriate action to counter terrorist threats here in Canada, Madam Speaker. And in fact, Madam Speaker, the restrictions that are put in place, as an example, on women is very upsetting. And I pointed out in terms of what's taking place in Ukraine, and you can sit down and you can explain that quite easily, virtually to anyone that wants to listen. The Iranian situation is something that's been taking place for a while now, Madam Speaker. And it's been very difficult in certain aspects for women, and it is gender-based. And the hardships, both economically and socially, that have had to be overcome because you were born a female versus a male, Madam Speaker. And I will go back to the issue of those human rights and Canadian values. In certain areas of the world, we all need to be concerned about advocating stronger and a more aggressive way for the recognition of women in their proper place in world society. Because there is so much work that needs to be done in that area. There are some countries, sadly, that are so far extreme that it is completely unacceptable, the types of behavior that are taking place, especially in the discrimination with respect to women. Countries that will sponsor terrorism, that invoke the element of fear by killing randomly, by suppressing rights and freedoms of their own population, Madam Speaker. You know, we have a great deal of debate inside this chamber about the issue of human rights and what it is that we can actually do. If we were to take a substantial, tangible action to deal with those types of hours and hours and hours of debates we've had over the years on this issue, a substantive action would be to support in favor of this piece of legislation. Legislation that sends a very clear message, whether it's to Russia, to Iran, and other countries that do not share the type of values that Canada has, that we do have tools that we can use to ensure that we are promoting our values. And that's what S8 is, Madam Speaker. It is all about ensuring that we have sanctions, ensuring that we can prevent people from entering Canada and ever being in Canada. It also enables us to be able to get rid of individuals here in Canada that have been associated in a very direct way, Madam Speaker. I would encourage all members to support this legislation, and it would be a wonderful message that we can send on this issue by seeing this legislation passed sooner as opposed to later. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Calgary-Shepherd.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So I think on this particular piece of legislation, the member will find that there are many Conservatives who are in agreement that aligning our sanctions regime with our inadmissibility criteria is a very good idea. It makes sure that we keep out people who have been found or are part of regimes that are violating people's human rights or are not in the best interest, Canada's national interest. But the member also mentioned that we have the strongest sanctions in the world. That's actually quite a laughable thing to say. Just on the question of the Russian Federation, the Republic of Poland, for example, has completely banned the import of Russian coal into the country. It has found inadmissible a whole wider range of individuals just simply for the promotion of the Russian Federation's positions, its symbols. It took months for this government to take Russia Today off of the airwaves in Canada, off the public requirements to have it on our airwaves is still available online. So just to mention, it's more of a commentary on the member's speech, because you'll find that when I do rise, and I hope I'll catch your eye, Madam Speaker, when I do rise to speak on this, you'll find there's agreement, but we do not have the strongest sanctions in the world. The Republic of Poland proves it.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, Madam Speaker, I can appreciate what it is that the member is saying. I don't necessarily agree with his conclusion. I think that if you take a look at it from a perspective of what it is that the government has brought forward, whether it is financial sanctions of banning of certain products. There are some things that are still flowing through Russia. Fertilizer, something in which the Conservatives are ultimately arguing we shouldn't even be putting the extra tariff on, right? At the end of the day, the sanctions take many different forms. The legislation, what we're doing is ensuring we're sending a very powerful message in terms of who can come, who can actually come to Canada. And that message, in a very simple way, is saying that, look, if you're a part of that regime, if you're the ones that are causing the type of hardship and human rights violations, we don't want you in Canada. And I see that as...
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Edmonton Strathcona.
And I have to say, I'm quite shocked that the member could speak for 20 minutes about how effective the sanction regime is when he knows very well that we have 1,600 people on our sanction regime. We have no transparency, no enforcement. We've seized $121 million over 6 months. In fact, you could put the entire Russian Federation on the sanctions list. If you're not going to enforce them, they don't matter.
That's right.
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. A part of it is ensuring that we have the appropriate tools in place, and that's one of the nice things about the legislation, is that will be one of the tools in the tool belt that will enable us to be able to enforce the sanctions. We're enabling the Canada Border Control and immigration to be able to deal with some of the sanctions. The member is wrong to try to give the impression that there is no enforcement. There is enforcement that is in place. There is a real impact. To say that there is nothing, Madam Speaker, is just not true. Canada continues to work with our allied countries, and the sanctions that are being put in place, not only by Canada, but our like-minded countries around the world, is having a real, tangible impact on Russia.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Connecticut.
Madam Speaker, under the Special Economic Measures Act, Canada has sanctioned over 1,200 individuals from Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus due to Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. And supporting the women's rights in Iran, I think Canada has imposed sanctions on over 250 individuals and entities in Iran. Can the government confirm that under the present legislation, S8, that the members of the sanctioned entities can also be found inadmissible? And secondly, if the sanctioned individuals are already in Canada, they can be removed under this legislation.
Parliamentary Secretary.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. My understanding of the legislation is that the member is quite correct. And that's why I say that this is a wonderful tool that is going to enable Canada to be able to do, as my New Democratic colleague just suggested, she wants to be able to ensure that we're able to enforce. This legislation goes a long way in supporting that enforcement. We want people to know that at the end of the day, that there is inappropriate, inhumane behavior that is taking place, and that sort of behavior is not acceptable. We don't want individuals of that nature coming to Canada, and those that are in Canada, it does enable us the opportunity to get them out of Canada. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Calgary-Nose Hill.
Madam Speaker, my colleague from Edmonton Strathcona raises a good point in that the government is woefully lacking an enforcement regime for some of the measures that are undertaken with regard to sanctions. This bill, it's putting in place a framework to be able to reject permanent resident, citizenship, or refugee applications on the basis of those who are on a sanctions list. I'm wondering if my colleague opposite can confirm that no persons on a sanction list have applied for any of these forms of immigration to Canada or have made safe passage to Canada right now already.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, Madam Speaker, we know that there are individuals, we believe that there are individuals that are in Canada in which this legislation, if and when passed, will have an impact on. In terms of if someone's actually gone onto a computer in order to start the process of an application coming to Canada for a nephew or a niece or whatever it might be, it is hard to be able to give a conclusive answer to what it is that the member is proposing. At the end of the day, Madam Speaker, the legislation in principle will have a very positive impact in ensuring that we can prevent the people that are on the sanction list from being able to come into Canada. And I have confidence, arguably probably more confidence than the Conservative Party does, in our civil service, believing that they understand the sanction list and they're not going to let people slip through.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Calgary-Nose Hill.
Madam Speaker, my colleague opposite, if I understood correctly, just confirmed that there are individuals or extended family members within Canada who perhaps might be on the sanctions regime. How many people does that apply to? How many people who are sanctioned by Canada that sanctions would apply to have been allowed into Canada by this government through our current immigration policies?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, Madam Speaker, I have no idea how many Stephen Harper let in. At the end of the day, the member's trying to turn this into a political issue, saying, could there be people in Canada? Can the member stand in her place and say, I can guarantee that there are no sanctioned people that Stephen Harper ever let in? From my perspective, it's a ridiculous question, Madam Speaker. The legislation that we're passing will ultimately, those individuals that are sanctioned, I suspect 2 years ago that there might be a family member of someone that's been sanctioned that came to Canada before the sanctions were put into place. Madam Speaker, I suspect that there might even be people that Stephen Harper, the former Conservative government, let him. This doesn't have to be as political as the member is trying to make it. At the end of the day, we're making a very strong statement to the world by bringing forward this legislation, and I would hope that the Conservative Party would want to pass it.
Honourable Member for Pitt Meadows, Maple Ridge.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I wonder if the member would be able to inform us how this bill might impact someone like Jihadi Jack, who was a British terrorist that fought with ISIS in Syria, and said he'd be happy to commit martyrdom by cutting off people's heads, including his friends, for being in the British military. And Britain cut off his citizenship, and yet we're opening the doormat for him. So if maybe the member could comment to that.
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, I'm very reluctant to start providing comments on individuals in which I don't have the full story. At the end of the day, I don't personally support any terrorist. anyone that threatens that sort of violence that the member is making a reference to. I don't believe there's any member of the Liberal caucus or any member of the House of Commons that supports any form of terrorists being in Canada. That's why we have a system through CSIS, through Canada Border Control, and the many other agencies that are well-staffed by professional civil servants to protect Canadian society. That's what this legislation is about, protecting Canadian society and ensuring that we have sanctions against regimes like Russia and Iran because of the barbaric things that they are doing.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Calgary-Shepherd.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just off the top, I'm going to say I'm going to share my time with the member for Calgary-Nose Hill. I know that often members forget, and then it causes a bit of consternation at the table. So off the top, I will mention that. Just so my constituents know what the debate is about, we are basically talking about S8, which is the amendments to Section 35.1A of the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, affectionately known by many of us as IRPA, because it's just easier to use the acronym as everything in government. This would basically change the grounds for inadmissibility to Canada under IRPA to match with our sanctions list. And part of the debate over the last 18 months has been the government having to catch up over time, sanctioning new people in order to match sanctions to the people we don't want to let in. As we list new organizations and new people, new events happen all over the world. So many of us were gripped with the protests taking place by women standing up for their rights in Iran after the death of Jina Mahsa Amini, a Kurdish woman who was, and I'm going to mispronounce the name, I think from the hometown was Sakuz, if I pronounce it correctly. I'm sure my Kurdish friends will correct me by email very soon. But she was visiting Tehran. She was picked on by the morality police. And when they noticed, I'm sure, on her identity papers that she was not from Tehran, they've quickly figured out that she was Kurdish and then beat her in custody, and she died a few days later. And that sparked off mass protests in Iran. And then the government decided to start sanctioning individual bits and pieces of the regime in order to show that it was on the side of the protesters. And many Iranians in Canada were there saying, well, why are you still letting in people who are members of the regime, people who have profited from the regime, people who are close to the regime, who are wives, girlfriends, they are coming here to study. And I was getting videos and pictures of people landing at the Toronto Pearson Airport who were known members of the regime. But of course, I would always tell them, what you know, we don't know, and you should inform the RCMP. Usually when they would go to the RCMP, they would say, well, they're not sanctioned. Those individuals, the organizations are sanctioned, and they have not been found inadmissible to Canada. So this would partially close that hole that many of us have called for in the past and are worried about, members of our communities have. But we also know that if you don't enforce the sanctions, if you don't enforce inadmissibility grounds, then it doesn't matter how many people you put onto a list. You have to have a government that has the will to act and actually impose them on individuals and enforce them through information gathering, information sharing to identify these people in Canada. And I'll just draw attention to the House to one specific person, because this is one I hear quite often when I go to Iranian protests and rallies in Canada. Morteza Talayi, who's the former police chief of Tehran, who was the police chief when Zahra Kazemi, an Iranian Canadian, was arrested, beaten in custody, and she died in custody. A Montrealer, I might add as well. The fact that we don't enforce our sanctions is, I think, one of the following debates that we'll have after this, when this piece of legislation hopefully makes it to committee and beyond, that will actually pass it into law, and the government will actually find the time to enforce it, devote the resources, but also give political direction to the CBSA to not only detain these people, then to deport these people. I had an order paper question given back to me just a few months ago that indicated the government was only following through on half of its deportation orders for people that have been found inadmissible to Canada already, which is a shocking number. It has gone way down since the pandemic. And that is a very worrying sign to me. I wanted to cover off what's happening in Iran, speak a little bit about the People's Republic of China, and then the Russian Federation and its war of aggression on Ukraine, because I think those are the three major countries that many of us think of when we think of our sanctions regime and then people we would like to be found inadmissible to Canada. So just to cover off on Iran, I've been a big supporter of the protest or individual case files that have come to my constituency office that I've tried to advocate for, both directly with the Minister of Immigration, but working with members from both sides of the House as well. I do want to mention that I have politically sponsored Mohammed Amin Akhlaqi, who was sentenced to death simply for the act of peacefully protesting by the regime. I also sponsored Amir Mohammed Jafari, 17 years old. 17 years old when he was arrested at his school. He was taken to prison. He was tortured, and then he was sentenced to 25 years in jail and then exile after his prison sentence is completed for the crime of corruption on earth, which is a broad claim made against many individuals in Iran. I've had many of these individuals whose family members have contacted me. It's just a broad-based accusation. They could do anything they want. And this is through IRGC-controlled courts, through a justice system where there is no justice. Now, many of these organizations have been sanctioned. We've sanctioned different bits of the regime. But in many of these cases, the fact that we are politically sponsoring them ensures their protection. It shows the Iranian regime that we are looking at their individual cases. And I track these every few days. I ask my staff and I look them up to make sure that nothing has happened to them. But the government needs to be doing more. And the little bit that we found in S8 isn't, I think, quite enough just yet. Finding some people admissible, following up on cases like Morteza Talayi and other Iranian nationals who have come to Canada on different visas, who may have overstayed here, who are still here, they should have their visas reviewed as well. And I'm hoping that this legislation will look after them. On the issues of enforcement of sanctions, we had a new Democratic member stand up to correct the record when the member from one of the Winnipeg ridings was speaking on behalf of the government. But our own Shadow Minister for International Trade had an order paper question come back demonstrating that the Canadian government over the last however many years has actually stopped at our border $0 worth of merchandise coming from the People's Republic of China for the use of slave labor from the Xinjiang province. In comparison, in America, they've actually stopped at their border billions of dollars of merchandise. And it's not as if our markets are all that different. We buy many goods. Many companies are buying goods, T-shirts, socks, lots of goods made of cotton. And in Xinjiang, cotton happens to be one of the major products that is made with slave labor. So companies have to ensure that they have an ethical supply chain, but it's incumbent upon the government to ensure that CBSA is directed to catch these at the border. It's impossible they're at $0. It's impossible. And the fact that we got that answer to an order paper question proves that the government isn't doing enough. So I'm hoping that after S8 gets a fulsome debate, both here in committee, at third reading, report stage, that members will get that satisfaction knowing the government is actually going to follow through and enforce. Lastly, on the Russian Federation, as I rose before to mention that we do not have the strongest sanctions in the world, because again, we're going piecemeal sanctioning different bits of the Russian Federation's regime. And I do have a Yiddish proverb, so no worry, Madam Speaker, it'll come at the very end. We've sanctioned different parts of the Russian regime, and there are mentions in S8 and references to the Justice for Sergei Magnitsky Act. It's a piece of legislation I worked on the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs when we were debating it at the time. Sergei Magnitsky, for those who don't know, was Bill Browder's lawyer in Russia. He uncovered a 200 million plus case of tax fraud being committed. For his troubles of being a fervent lawyer trying to get to the truth, he was arrested by the Russian regime. He was kept in confinement. He was beaten, tortured, murdered for the simple act of following up on tax law and making sure that the Russian taxpayer was getting their due. And a highly corrupt regime that is run by President Putin and the oligarchs in Russia can't be trusted. They've now moved to a hot war. It's a war they started in 2014, but moved to a hot war last year. This piecemeal approach to sanctioning different parts of the regime hasn't worked. There are many European countries that have much stronger regime sanctions than we do. I gave the example of the Republic of Poland before that has banned all coal imports, but they've also banned spreading Russian propaganda. They prevented Russia Today from broadcasting. They've done many other things, but many of these Eastern European countries have a much longer history of trying to resist what many of them will call their long-time centuries oppressor, which is why many of them joined NATO after the Warsaw Pact fell apart. So I do have a Yiddish proverb because I did want to mention this, and I made myself a note. If you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. And Yiddish is wonderful because it always tries to make something that is saying in a positive way, but actually mean it as kind of an insulting thing. And in this particular case, months from now, we will be moving on other government legislation, and I'm convinced the government caucus will be accusing the Conservatives of holding up pieces of legislation because we want to debate things, bring issues forward, individual cases that we think are worthy of this chamber listening to it. And we'll be told that legislation needs to be rushed because it needs to be passed. And I will think back to this moment when we debated S8. We were debating legislation that many of us agree with, but it's the government House leader's job to schedule government orders and to make sure that the priorities of the government are passed. I note that this legislation started in the Senate instead of the House. So much for a House of sober second thought when we are the ones looking at government legislation from the Senate.
Questions and comments? The Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, Madam Speaker, I'll have to get the member of the actual count, but I can assure him that Stephen Harper had, I believe, dozens of pieces of legislation that came from the Senate into the House. It could be as high as 45 or so pieces of Senate. So he might want to reflect in terms of his last comment. And when he talks about, yes, we would like to see the legislation pass. You know, and he makes reference to what he'll refer to months from now. Well, we only need to take a look at this week. This week, we're on Friday. There was a Tuesday opposition day, a Thursday opposition day. Wednesday's a short day. Monday was a government day, and that's when the Conservatives brought in another opposition day by bringing in a concurrence motion, therefore not allowing us to debate government bills. So you can't have it both ways, Madam Speaker. They can't play their political games in the chamber and then say the government's not calling legislation. We would like to see this legislation pass, and I'm wondering what his thoughts are on that.
Honourable Member for Calgary-Shepherd.
Well, Madam Speaker, the member for Winnipeg North likes to, bring up what happened over 8 years ago. That's over a decade ago. I don't think Netflix existed back then. Like, what does what happened 8 years ago have to do with S8 and the current legislation we're debating? The government passed a motion that they can do evening sittings, and they've chosen not to exercise it many times. This is a choice made by the government House leader. So the choices they make is an indication of, sometimes what are their priorities or whether they simply don't have a plan for what government legislation is absolutely critical. And on this particular one, I'm pleased with the contents of the legislation, but I am worried about the enforcement of it. I am worried that Iranian nationals who came to Canada years ago, post-2015, are still going to be able to stay here because there will be no enforcement of the provisions in S8.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The Honourable Member for Calgary-Nose Hill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm wondering if my colleague opposite could expand on why the enforcement piece is so important in a bill like this and how this bill is lacking that, but also how the government does have enforcement tools at its disposal right now, but seems to be very reluctant to use them, particularly when it comes to sanctions. He outlined many instances of this in his speech. What could the government be doing already within its existing purview to ensure that those who Canada has placed sanctions on, even some of the weak ones that we already have, are actually subject to some of the punishments that would be associated with the same?
Honourable Member for Calgary-Shepherd.
So I'd like to thank the member for the question. She has the theme right, which is the enforcement of the provisions. The government could be directing the Canada Border Services Agency to focus on deportations of dangerous forest nationals, or nationals specifically who happen to be from Iran, from the Islamic Republic of Iran, who are known affiliate members of the regime. They could focus on individuals who have been found or are strongly suspected to be associated with human rights violations in, say, the Democratic Republic of the Congo. There are individuals in this country who are either violent criminals or associated with regimes that are violent inherently to itself. So that's political direction directly from the government. They could be giving directly to CPSA. And like I've mentioned before, I have a response from the government saying they've only followed through on half of their deportation orders.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Dauphin-Swan River, Nipawin.
Speaker, I was wondering if the member can expand a bit on what these delays mean to our trading partners, and to what kind of signal does the delays, this government taking action, send to our partners in fighting these type of regimes?
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Shepherd.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The signal it sends to many other countries is that we're slow to act. And that was the case when the protests in Iran happened, for example. I think it took the government 6 to 8 weeks before they actually reacted as a government. There were statements made in the House by different government caucus members, for sure, and there are members on our side of the House that mentioned it as well. But actual action, so putting people on the regimes list, organizations on the regimes list, and we haven't done the final thing, which I think is what this House has actually called for since 2018. We passed a motion here, a conservative motion, to list the IRGC as a terrorist organization. With that, you can then go to court. What our partners will see, what our allies will see, is that Canada takes its role seriously in the world as a defender of human rights. And right now we don't have it, so listing the IRGC in the case of Iran would actually show them that we are serious about pursuing human rights violators in our country.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Calgary-Noshiel.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Again, just for my constituents, we're debating a bill that it proposes to establish a legal framework for persons to be declared inadmissible or deported from Canada under the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act due to their person, country of origin, or organization being subject to sanctions. I want to pick up on my colleague's theme about enforcement of sanctions. So what this bill would do is, I think what the government is trying to do is to make sure that no cases slip through the cracks, even though there are already a lot of mechanisms which exist in Canadian law to ensure that such persons wouldn't have access to Canada. So to pick up on the theme of enforcement, my colleague just outlined some of the issues from Calgary Shepherd, just outlined some of the issues with enforcement on sanctions. And then troublingly, the government deputy House leader also said that there may be people in Canada who are subject to sanctions that the government has not yet moved to act on, which is troubling. I mean, the government has had 8 years to deal with these sorts of instances, and they haven't. But the theme of slipping through the cracks is much broader than just this bill when it comes to the immigration system. I would like to draw my colleague to give an example of how I don't feel this bill adequately addresses enforcement mechanisms. I'd like to draw my colleague's attention to an article that was just published moments ago, actually, in the Globe and Mail, which states that a member of the other place, Madam Speaker, issued 640 documents to Afghan nationals, which apparently said, and I've seen one instance of these, that individuals had been granted a visa to enter Canada. Now, this was done through questioning over the last several days. The current Minister of Immigration says this was done without the authorization of Citizenship, Immigration and Refugees Canada. So what IRCC says is that this senator did not have the authority, as they wouldn't, no one in this place, does not have the authority to issue visas. Yesterday in the Immigration Committee, I outlined an instance of one of my constituents' families who received these letters, and frankly, they fooled me, Madam Speaker, for nearly a year, who thought that they had received a visa or a permission to enter Canada. And even after a year of trying to deal with virtually every department in the Government of Canada, we could never get confirmation on what documentation the government was or wasn't using. As this story is unfolding today, we're seeing now that in an affidavit put forward yesterday in a related court case, the affected person from the other place, as well as a consultant named Laura Robinson, that there are apparently 640 instances of these letters being issued. Worse, Madam Speaker, I know that IRCC, GAC, and other agencies were aware of at least the case that I was dealing with. There was no, as far as we can tell, action taken during this time. But today, the affidavit that that person put forward with regard to the case also states that this was done at the behest of the former Chief of Staff of the Defense Minister at the time, so that that person, I believe his name is George Young, actually sent these documents to the person from the other place and said, go ahead, use these. And again, they say granted a visa. and they bear, the instance I saw, they bear the Government of Canada's seal, and a very authentic looking seal. So this isn't just like an email or something. This is a document with a government seal that purports to grant somebody entry into Canada. And I'll read from the Globe and Mail article. It says, in her affidavit, this senator said she regularly emailed the former Minister of Foreign Affairs, the former Minister of Defense, and the former Minister of Immigration, who is now the Minister of Public Safety, as well as their senior staff. The names they gave were Mike Jones and Olga Radchenko. The issue I have with this, Madam Speaker, is not that we shouldn't be bringing Afghan nationals to Canada, particularly those like the family of my constituents who Canada had a duty and an obligation to protect. We should have been doing a lot more. The issue that I have with here was that the government called a federal election and then, according to this affidavit, allowed a workaround process that none of us in this place had access to and persons who were not authorized by IRCC, it appears that they essentially said people that were not duly authorized had the ability to just issue these letters. There's a reason why our immigration process is arm's length and is separate from political mechanisms. It's so that we can ensure that the equity of the process is unimpeachable, that when we are making hard decisions on who comes into this country, particularly in times of crisis, that we can assure our constituents that this was done under just circumstances and legal circumstances, because that's how we ensure that the public has trust and faith in the institution of the government. This has enormous implications, not just for the sanctity of the government's process on immigration, which is, again, the subject. They're introducing legislation, I think, because they failed to use existing enforcement mechanisms. But this case that we're seeing today, Madam Speaker, it also put lives at risk. The family of my constituent expressed that they received these letters, which they thought, coming from a government official, would allow them access to Canada. They came out of hiding and they exposed themselves to try and get to the airport. Then, because they were in possession of these letters, my office tried to help them for nearly a year to try and, okay, why they've been approved, why can't they come to Canada? They actually missed, they weren't able to apply for another program, and because they applied late, the government said, sorry, there's no room here. So now I'm wondering, I have to wonder, any other programs that the government put forward to bring Afghan nationals in here, now that there's a civil suit, there's all sorts of stuff happening, how are they selecting those persons? And are those persons going to be part of the lawsuit that they're trying to make it go away? It brings me no joy to raise these matters in the House, Madam Speaker, but the bottom line is that the government has exposed itself to this type of questioning because they refused to, apparently over the course of a year, I don't know what happened here, over the course of a year, to use basic enforcement mechanisms to try and see if documentation that was being presented was authentic. And if they did not have a process to evacuate persons in Afghanistan, Madam Speaker, they should not have called a federal election. That's just the reality. These types of documents that came through my office, and I want to tell you, I was the critic, I was the vice chair of the Immigration Committee for 4 years. I know my way around the immigration file. These documents fooled me. And why did they fool me? Because the government was completely opaque, completely non-transparent on the process by which they were using to address this situation. And I get it, it was chaotic. But the part of the duty and onus of this government is to see these things coming. As many colleagues in the House were talking about for months, we knew this was coming. The government knew that this was a risk. And instead of putting due process in place, it looks like they did a panic workaround, and I think used a well-intentioned person that they knew. They should have shut this down and put something in place that was proper, or they shouldn't have called an election. The result of this is a lack of compassion, undermining the integrity of our immigration system, and putting people like my constituents and family at risk. The government needs to look and do everything possible to find out what happened here and hold persons who are accountable to, who are responsible for this to account. Otherwise, this bill that's in front of us today, any other mechanism is always going to be attached with questions, which is the best way to get to Canada by having a fake visa issued to you by a member of parliament or a senator?
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to pick up on the member's comments in regards to just the fraudulent documents. Many years ago, I also was on the Immigration Standing Committee, and I can remember the representation on that, because it applies even when we talk about individuals that attempt to get into Canada, quite possibly even if they have been sanctioned. And often, when you take a look at the documentation that is actually provided, what we found out in Standing Committee was that you have a whole industry that's out there that's built on coming up and designing documents that look authentic. And we need to work with other agencies, in particular other governments in many ways, international governments, to try to deal with that particular industry, because those documents are in fact very convincing, and I'm wondering if she could provide further thoughts in regards to the appearance of some of those fake documents.
Calgary Nose Hill.
We're not talking about an industry in the case that I raised. We're talking about a member of the other place, a sitting parliamentarian, a consultant who was paid for by tax dollars through her office, as far as I can tell on her expense disclosures, the former chief of staff to the defense minister, and there's a litany of others that were associated with the government that were associated with this affidavit that's been filed. So this isn't about an industry. The question I would pose back to my colleague is, how can anybody have any confidence in this government if we're talking about members of the government or parliamentarians being allowed to issue inauthentic documentation without any sort of recourse or remedy, even though apparently they've known about this for a while?
And comments. The Honourable Member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Madam Speaker, and I would like to thank my colleague for raising this important issue in the House. You know, I wrote to the then Minister of Foreign Affairs in February of 2021 to demand that he take action so that we would not be in a situation where people were not able to get out of Afghanistan when Kabul fell. Of course, nothing was done. An election was called instead. But I wonder if the member agrees that we should have the current member or Minister for Public Safety, the current Minister for International Development, and the previous Minister for Foreign Affairs give some testimony in this place so that we can be assured that, in fact, no fraud took place. Thank you.
Member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my colleague for her question, and she's right. Members in this place, including herself, they knew that we've been raising this issue well before the 2021 election when Kabul fell. Members in this place will have the opportunity to talk to their caucuses about a motion in front of the Citizenship and Immigration Committee, which would do just that, summons these people so that they can come and be questioned and held to account by Parliament if this government won't do the same.
The Honourable Member will have 2 minutes after question period to pursue the questions and comments. Statements by members. Déclaration des députés. The Honourable Member for Spadina, Fort York.
Madam Speaker, I'm rising today to bring to the government's attention the high level of concern being expressed by my constituents about their personal safety. There have been many incidents of violence, and several have received widely covered attention as they occurred in our community of Spadina, Fort York. For example, the tragic swarming and murder of Ken Lee, a 59-year-old man, by 8 female youth assailants, occurred right across the street from my constituency office. A woman was also stabbed on board the Spadina streetcar, the same transportation used by my constituents to go to school, to pick up groceries, and to go to work. My community and our city demands action. Placing a few extra police on subway platforms, while helpful, is not a definitive answer. This is why, Madam Speaker, I have organized a town hall meeting in my riding on February 15th on the issue of community safety. Representatives from the Toronto Police Service will also be present. This meeting gives constituents an opportunity to voice their concerns and explore measures that could be put in place.
Honourable member for Winnipeg North.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm waiting. Madam Speaker, no matter where you live or what you earn, healthcare services throughout the country are something in which we all believe in, Madam Speaker. It is a core part of what it means to be a Canadian. $198 billion in additional federal dollars to support healthcare, Madam Speaker, over the next 10 years. That is a commitment to a national healthcare program. Access to family doctors or nurse practitioners, support for healthcare workers, reducing backlogs. Mental health is a part of healthcare. Support data and science, transparency and fairness. The Canada Health Act, Madam Speaker, matters to all Canadians. I'm so proud to be of a government that is so committed to providing one of the core values.
The honourable member for Bow River.
Speaker, and it's good to see you back in the House, and welcome back. It's just incredible how the Liberal government believes Canadians have just never had it so good. But they're just plain wrong. The Prime Minister believes his tax and spend agreement is just too good to quit, even though over half the country thinks the Prime Minister is just incapable of doing this job. Record high inflation just increased by 9%, and it's just some $500 billion in spending that led to this crisis. But the CRA thinks it's just not worth tracking down. Canadians are just trying to get by, and that's just why the Conservative team is just going to make Canada the best place to live on earth again. The carbon tax will then be just a bad nightmare for farmers, and they will be happy that they finally just got a break. It's just this Prime Minister that got Canada into this mess, and Canadians want the Prime Minister to just get out of the way so the Conservatives can just clean it up. Yay!
The honourable member for Halifax West.
Condolences on the passing of William Joseph Gorman. As an educator, speaker, and volunteer, Bill gave of himself freely and touched the lives of many. He was a model of what all good teachers and all good people aspire to be. My memories of Bill go back to September 1976. Those first few weeks of being back in Canada and going to English school for the first time. Not only did I not know anyone, but I also could not communicate in English. There was Mr. Gorman, then principal of St. Agnes Elementary and Junior High, who welcomed me with kindness and compassion. He offered support with a smile then, as well as decades later when I decided to run for public office and we reconnected. To his wife Diane, children Bruce and Cindy, grandchildren and extended family, my sincere condolences. Please know that he will be fondly remembered for his good deeds and actions.
The honourable member for Winnipeg Centre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. February is Black History Month, and this year's theme is Black Resistance. Remember, recognize, and educate. After 2 years of virtual programming, I'm thrilled that Black History Month events are being held in person again in Winnipeg. And I want to congratulate Black History Month Manitoba and its chairperson, Nadia Thompson. For over 40 years, this organization has played a critical role in serving Black communities and educating the broader public about Black history, Black resistance, and the enormous contributions the Black community has made in Manitoba. I also want to acknowledge my provincial NDP colleague, Jamie Moses, the MLA for St. Vital, whose bill to officially recognize February as Black History Month in Manitoba received royal assent on December 1st, 2022. I'm delighted that the bill passed in time for this February. Black history is Manitoba history. It is Winnipeg history. I encourage folks to visit Black History Manitoba's website for a full calendar of events taking place.
L'honorable député de Longueuil-Charlemagne.
The honourable member for Longueuil-Charlemagne. Madam Speaker, students from 2 secondary schools in my riding, Agora School and Gérard Filion School, are welcoming some special visitors this week. They're hosting students from Nanaimo Christian School in British Columbia as part of the YMCA Youth Exchanges Canada program funded by Canadian Heritage. According to Lynn Marcheterre of Gérard Filion High School, cultural exchanges like this are important because they give young people a chance to see and understand the lives of others. During their stay, the students will visit the Quebec Carnaval, Montreal's Chinatown, and many other places. And in the spring, the Longueuil students will travel to Nanaimo to visit that beautiful part of Canada. This exchange program offers young people a unique experience. It encourages teamwork and openness to others. I am sure that the students will enjoy it to the fullest. I'm excited for all the participants of this exchange, and I wish the students from British Columbia a pleasant stay in our riding. Thank you.
Energy affordability is a major concern under this NDP Liberal Costly Coalition. While the NDP and Liberals are clinging to their woke climate dogma, many Canadians are struggling with the decision to put food on their table or to heat their homes. And it's only going to get worse. According to the government's own documents, there will nearly be a 25% increase in electricity demands by 2050, mainly due to these out-of-touch Liberal mandate policies. So, Mr. Speaker, what is the plan to increase our electricity production? What energy sources will we use to fuel this increase? And when will the Liberals begin to build grid capacity in our electric system? An upgrade like this is going to cost hundreds of billions of dollars, and it will take decades to build. But as usual, the Liberals make the announcement, take the photo op, and then do nothing. Except this time, their obsession with wokeism might literally leave Canadians in the dark, bankrupt, or both.
The honourable member for Kanata Carleton.
Madam Speaker, I rise today on the International Day of Women and Girls in Science to recognize the incredible women and girls who have discovered their love and pursued careers in science and technology. I'm sending my love to all of these women, including the many who work in companies like Nokia, Ericsson, and Ciena in my riding of Kanata Carleton. These women continue to inspire new generations of young girls to explore STEM careers. They are careers in which you can literally change the world. Despite countless barriers, the traditionally male-dominated fields of science and technology are becoming more and more enriched by the balance that gender equity brings. We must smash stereotypes and clear the hurdles that hold women and girls back. We must strive to expose girls to the fields of science and technology and support their ambitions. I want to remind girls who love research.
The honourable member for Scarborough-Rouge Park.
Madam Speaker, for many years, the Children's Breakfast Club has marked Black History Month in Canada by visiting Parliament Hill. Hundreds of children from across the Greater Toronto Area pack onto trains provided by Via Rail and make their way onto the Hill. During their journey, they are accompanied by special guests such as the Honourable Jean Augustine, for whom we all must thank for ensuring that Black History Month is recognized across Canada. They learn about the many Black Canadian trailblazers based on the themes chosen for that year. Black porters, doctors, nurses, and politicians who left their mark on Canadian history for generations to come. This year's theme is Emancipation Day. I'm happy to welcome the Children's Breakfast Club back onto the Hill after a pandemic pause on Wednesday, February the 15th. I welcome my colleagues in the House to join us as we recognize the contributions of Black Canadians from coast to coast to coast.
Bravo.
The honourable member for Calgary-Shepherd.
As I speak, Turks, Kurds, Syrians, and many others are living the tragedy of the 7.8 magnitude earthquake. As of now, reports estimate the death toll at over 22,000 people, and unfortunately, the number of lives lost are expected to increase. However, there's more that we can do to help, both as a government and as a people, starting with urging Turkey's government to end the discrimination against Kurdish earthquake victims. According to Kurdish journalists and victims of the earthquake, Kurdish cities, including Elbistan and Pazarcek, are not receiving aid or emergency rescue services from Turkish organizations. Yimmer 157, the government foreign communications network in Turkey, translates in 7 languages the emergency information needed to save people, but bizarrely, not in any Kurdish, the second most spoken language in the country. Relief organizations like Hey Vayar Sur the Kurdish Red Crescent, and the White Helmets in Syria are wonderful options for Canadians for need is great, and the support of tens of thousands of displaced and injured people need that support.
Honourable member for Markham Unionville.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As we celebrate Black History Month, I want to take a moment to recognize and honor the contributions and achievements of Black Canadians. From trailblazers in politics, arts, and science to everyday heroes who have made a difference in their communities. Black Canadians have played a vital role in shaping our country. I would like to acknowledge Markham's own York Region Alliance of African Canadian Communities and the Markham African Caribbean Canadian Association for their exceptional advocacy in our community. This month, let us also remember the ongoing struggles for racial justice and equity and commit to working towards a more inclusive and welcoming society for all. I'm proud to stand with Black Canadians, and I'm committed to continuing to support and uplift their voice. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes.
After 8 years of this Prime Minister, Canadians are lined up at food banks and Liberal insiders are lining their pockets. We continue to see it time and time again, whether it's the Prime Minister furthering the interests of his friends, the former Finance Minister, the Intergovernmental Affairs Minister, and now the Trade Minister. It's sweetheart deals and hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of dollars, depending on the case, to Liberal insiders, while Canadians struggle to keep the heat on. Canadians expect better from their government officials, and they deserve accountability. Canada's Conservatives will continue to press this government to be accountable to Canadians, and we're going to give Canadians that accountability and continue to call on this minister to resign and to repay the tens of thousands of dollars that she gave to her insider friends.
The honourable member for Langley, Aldergrove.
After 8 years of this Liberal government, Canadians are facing a cost of living crisis. Inflation at a 40-year high, seniors worried about putting food on the table, and university students going to food banks. After 8 years of this Prime Minister's incompetence, we have high interest rates, doubling of mortgage payments, and out-of-reach residential rental rates. After 8 years of this Prime Minister mismanaging our economy, job postings aren't being filled, investors are heading south. All the while, the Liberal government is doubling the national debt. After 8 years, Canada is missing all its environmental targets, but the Liberals will triple the carbon tax, driving up the cost of everything and making home heating more expensive. After 8 years of this Liberal government, Canadians have had enough. Conservatives will keep the heat on and take the tax off.
The Honourable Member for Sherbrooke. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Earlier this year, the University of Sherbrooke was ranked first in the world for sustainable development in the International STARS ranking for higher education institutions. It's an unprecedented achievement. This prestigious acknowledgement reaffirms the university's position as a leader in sustainable development and demonstrates its ability to be a driver of change to inspire our societies and propel our country to become greener, more responsible, and more inclusive. In order to address the issues facing our society, over 75% of the university's departments are involved in research related to sustainable development and offer sustainable development-related courses. 90% of departments offer related courses. Let's be proud of the rectorate, of all of the teaching and support staff, and especially of the university's student community, which is taking this institution to new heights. Thank you.
Member for Edmonton, Griswold.
Millions of Canadians are grappling with the reality of our country's colonial past and present. But our institutions are not, and this House, Madam Speaker, worst among them. Yesterday, I sat in Public Accounts and listened to the Auditor General plea with this government to finally do what's right and end the systemic racism present in the federal prison system. It's no secret Indigenous people make up a vast majority of our prison system, while only making up a minority in Canada. These are shameful results. But instead of holding this government truly accountable, the leader of the opposition is only making things worse with reckless rhetoric and failed tough-on-crime policies that harm Black and Indigenous communities without making things safer. I call on the Minister of Public Safety and the leader of the opposition to sit down and listen to the Indigenous people who are living the consequences of this colonization.
The Honourable Member for Jonquière. Madam Speaker, we're in the middle of Teachers' Week, and I'd like to greet all teachers and commend them. The theme of this year's event could not be more appropriate. The theme is, every day we measure the importance of your role and feel the importance of it. For every day we entrust our teachers with the most precious thing in the world, our children. We watch our children learn, grow, and develop under the loving guidance of their teachers and educators. Our teachers put their hearts into their work and not to mention the long hours and often difficult conditions of their work. They are always imaginative and creative, and they often work small miracles. They have the future of Quebec in their hands. They know how to take care of the future of Quebec and of our children. On behalf of the Bloc Québécois, I would like to thank them for their dedication and service to our children. On a more personal note, I'd like to highlight the exceptional dedication of my wife, Lynn, the teacher of my heart, her sister, Francine, and her father, Gaëtan. They've been working in the teaching profession, father to daughter, for nearly 60 years. The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. 2 days after the tragedy in Laval, we are all still grieving. Families are grieving, parents and children, they'll be affected for a long time. There are survivors who will have scars forever, and parents all over have to explain the unexplainable to their children. This unspeakable tragedy is horrible, but let us commend the exceptional efforts of first responders. We all saw the photo of a firefighter carrying a little girl in his arms. And let's also thank Mark Haddad, a father who intervened quickly and effectively. He said that the real heroes are the educators and the children, and he said that what's most important is to think of the survivors and also of those who have lost loved ones. Like many, I have the honor of being a father and a grandfather. I have 2 children, and I have 2 daycare-age young granddaughters. I cannot imagine the pain that these parents who are victims of the tragedy must be feeling. We need to be more attentive than ever. We need to ask for help if we need and talk about things if we need to. We will always remember these children. We will never forget them.
The Honourable Member for Cambridge.
Madam Speaker, this year is the 50th anniversary of the city of Cambridge, Ontario, my hometown, which was formed when Galt, Preston, and Hespeler and Blair were amalgamated in 1973. As someone who has lived in Cambridge for many, many years, I am proud to call Cambridge my home. This year, we are celebrating the beauty of our architecture and natural environments, our booming restaurant industry, our inspiring arts and culture community, and our contributions to television and film, and the history and heritage that shaped our community. We remember the people of Cambridge who made the city what it is today. This year, let's come together to celebrate the past, present, and future of Cambridge. Let's continue to build on the legacy of those who have come before us and create a future that is brighter than ever before. To all in this House and to everyone across Canada, I invite you to visit Cambridge to celebrate its 50th birthday. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Questions orales. Oral questions. The Honourable Member for Thornhill.
Another week and another condemnation for these Liberals. The parliamentary budget officer they appointed condemned their own government for saying that it's not worth the effort to recover $15 billion of COVID overpayments to wealthy corporations. Worse, they haven't changed a thing. The Auditor General said so too. They hired 10,000 more tax collectors. $15 billion, Madam Speaker, is $1,000 per Canadian household, per family. Not worth it? Are they kidding?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of National Revenue.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. All one has to do is to go into Canadian communities across this country to understand the importance of the various COVID-19 emergency programs that were introduced. whether it was CERB, whether it was the wage subsidy. These programs helped the country through. At a time when Canadians needed their government was there. Where was the opposition? The opposition was talking about austerity. They were talking about making cuts. We will not defend that kind of an agenda. We will put forward a progressive agenda that helps Canadians. Thank you very much.
Member for Thornhill.
The government says that it's not worth collecting $15 billion from their well-connected, wealthy corporate friends. Today, they're standing by that. Mr. Speaker, if someone's grandmother owed $15, the CRA would call that grandmother until she paid back every last cent.
Yeah.
$15 billion, not worth it. They must be kidding. Will they commit to getting the illegal money back from big corporations so that Canadian families can afford to pay their bills?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It turns out that the Conservatives apparently are following the lead of their leader, who is staying up very late at night, as we understand, watching crypto episodes on YouTube. What he's missing as a result of that, and what they're missing, is the public record. In public accounts last week, the commissioner of the CRA made very clear that the verification work is ongoing with respect to determining whether or not individuals and businesses were actually eligible for the programs that they received, the support that they received. This work is vital. We committed to it as a government, and they supported it. So let's let it continue.
Honourable Member for Thornhill.
They haven't changed a thing. The Auditor General said so. $15 billion of illegal payments to corporations and more taxes for ordinary Canadians. After 8 years of this Prime Minister, Canadians are the ones cutting back. They're cutting back on meals. 1 in 5 of them are skipping them. Seniors are turning their heat down because of this Prime Minister's punishing carbon tax, and they are cutting back on the things they want after 8 years of this Prime Minister making everything they need more expensive. Canadians are the ones feeling this Liberal government's austerity. Will they take responsibility or get out of the way so we can fix it?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Tourism.
We reduced taxes on middle-class Canadians on 2 separate occasions, and both times the Conservatives voted against it. I would like to address the Statistics Canada report of this morning, Madam Speaker, which indicated that 150,000 new jobs were created in January alone. Madam Speaker, this is well above market expectations, and we know that the best thing for Canadians struggling to meet the rising cost of living is to have a good, well-paying job.
L'honorable député de Mégantic-L'Érable.
Après 8 ans de ce Premier ministre.
After 8 years with this Liberal Prime Minister's monetary nonchalance and inflationary deficits, Canadians are struggling to make ends meet. The big losers of this government's decisions are the middle class. They're excluded from Liberal assistance programs because they earn too much, but they're not rich enough to benefit from the generosity he shows his friends. It's so sad to see that 9 out of 10 young people who dreamed of buying a home will not be able to. Will the Prime Minister take responsibility and give Canadians the right to dream of a better future? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Tourism. Madam Speaker, the Conservatives talk about the middle class. We reduced taxes for the middle class twice, and the Conservatives voted against. This morning, we found out that 150,000 new jobs were created in Canada, and 1/3 of those jobs were created in Quebec, about 50,000 of those jobs. Our priority is to make sure that we have good, well-paying jobs for our fellow citizens. And this morning's numbers are the proof. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. What we voted against, Madam Speaker, are inflationary policies for this government over the last 8 years. The result is that large grocery chains announced this week that the grocery costs are going to go up again in the coming months. Last year, it went up by 11%, and this year, the average family is going to pay $1,000 more to have access to groceries, to eat, to put bread and butter, meat, vegetables on their table. That's the reality that the Liberals don't want to see, but is happening. Will the Prime Minister, the Honourable Minister of Sport? Madam Speaker, the government has been responsible and helped citizens when they needed it most. We created dental care for children less than 12 years old and a $500 rent. I will interrupt the Honourable Minister. Will the Honourable Minister allow?
The Honourable Minister.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Alors, je disais que notre gouvernement...
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Our government has a responsible attitude by helping people when they need it the most to get through hard times. Why is it every time we want to help Canadians, do the Conservatives oppose it, such as when we cut taxes for the middle class twice? The Honourable Member for Salaberry-sur-Roi. Madam Speaker, we knew that New York was paying asylum seekers free bus tickets to Plattsburgh to Roxham Road. What Radio-Canada revealed today is that once there, American customs officers are taking asylum seekers to Roxham. Some of them have even started engaging in black market deals. The Americans don't care about our federal government. Their own government employees are acting as human smugglers. When will the government put an end to this bad joke and suspend the Safe Third Country Agreement?
Minister of Immigration and Citizenship.
Madam Speaker, the Safe Third Country Agreement is not a magic bullet. We need to continue working with the United States to modernize our agreements with them and, at the same time, continue to work with our counterparts, including in the province of Quebec.
Treated extremely seriously. We're going to be there for our provincial partners and work with our international partners to find a lasting solution.
Honorable député de Salaberry-sur-Roi.
Madame la Présidente, le Canada a des...
Madam Speaker, Canada has obligations towards asylum seekers, but there's no obligation to do the work of the United States. We never could have imagined that when we talked about criminal smugglers at Roxham Road, we'd be talking about American customs officers. It's illegal to exploit asylum seekers, illegal to knowingly help people with irregular border crossings. Will the Minister of Public Safety pick up the phone, talk to his American counterpart, and demand that he deal with his own employees who are breaking the law at Roxham Road? The Honourable Minister of Immigration. Thank you for the question. It's essential to continue to work with our partners. There's many conversations happening with our counterparts in the United States to try and establish agreements with the United States and find a lasting solution. At the same time, it's essential to continue to work with the province of Quebec to respect our obligations, to support asylum seekers, and to respect our national and international agreements.
Madam Speaker, Afghan women and girls can't go to school. They can't see a doctor. They are prisoners in their own country. For 18 months, these women and girls should have been getting help from Canadian organizations. Instead, this so-called feminist government continues to fail Afghans by delaying a humanitarian carve-out. So to the Minister of Public Safety, how much longer will he make women and girls in Afghanistan wait? How many more women and girls in Afghanistan will die before he acts?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister.
Speaker, the situation in Afghanistan, in particular for Afghan women and girls, is terrible. We condemn the Taliban's treatment of women and girls in Afghanistan and the treatment of women's liberty there. As access to education, as we all know, is a fundamental human right and one that should be respected. The Taliban will be judged by their actions in this regard.
The Honourable Member for Port Moody Coquitlam.
Madam Speaker, nurses and healthcare workers are run off their feet, exhausted and burning out. They are mainly women, disproportionately racialized women, and yet they have never been paid fairly. This discrimination is wrong, and the Liberals let it worsen over the last 7 years. Our nurses and healthcare workers are underpaid and undervalued. They deserve better wages, better working conditions, and respect. Why doesn't the Liberals' healthcare offer to the provinces include real funding for raises to finally give care economy workers the respect they deserve?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and our colleague is exactly right. For
workers to care for people and patients, we need to care for them. It's been very hard during COVID-19 and until now, with all the pressure, the mental health challenges that they've had, the physical damage that COVID-19 has had on workers. They have left in large numbers. Many of them are sick or tired. We need to care for them if we want them to keep caring for us. Thank you.
Hear, hear.
The honourable member for Regina Capel.
Mr. Speaker, 8 years of Liberal deficits, waste, and corruption have driven inflation to record highs, and nowhere is that more obvious than in the grocery aisle. Now, the Prime Minister likes to try to blame everyone else, but even the Liberals are now admitting that inflation is caused by domestic factors. One of those factors is the carbon tax. It makes everything farmers use to grow their crops more expensive, and those costs get passed on to consumers. Now the government is going to triple that carbon tax. So why should Canadians believe anything Liberals say about addressing the cost of living crisis when they are deliberately making Canadians pay more for food?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I appreciate the question because let's talk about the rising cost of food. Let's talk about what families are facing. Let's talk about families like mine. When I'm at the grocery store with my son Nitin and he's wanting a particular cereal, a particular type of dessert, and I talk to him about the rising cost of groceries, I also explain to him about what we're doing to help Canadians. And I tell him that we're targeting our...
If the honourable members ask a question, can you please give the honourable member answering it the courtesy of keeping silent? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
What I do is when I speak to my son, I explain to him about what we're doing at a targeted way to help Canadians that are struggling with the cost of those groceries, those expensive items as we walk down the aisle in those grocery stores. And I tell him we're targeting benefits, such as dental care benefits, such as affordability benefits.
Member for Regina Capel.
The worst part about their carbon tax is that they try to dress it up as an environment plan, but it's not working. They haven't hit a single target. You see, the Liberal plan was to drive up the cost of everything and hope that greenhouse gas emissions fell as a result. I can report to the minister that the first part of that plan, making everything more expensive, they nailed that. The second part, not so much. Now, the Canada Food Price Report is saying that food prices are going to go up again in 2023, as a typical farm could see their taxes with the tripling of the carbon tax hit $150,000 a year. And again, all of that gets passed on to the consumer. So why is this government making...
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, another important question, but there's also an important response. And the response is that when you're trying to target a pressing issue as pressing nationally and internationally as climate change, you need to take direct action. That's the kind of answers my children demand from me at the dinner table each and every night. What are you doing, Baba, to deal with the changing pollution, the changing temperatures? And what I say to them is that we're putting in place a price on pollution that affects people's behavior, that helps us make better decisions for our families and for our country. That's the kind of answers Canadians deserve.
The Honourable Member for Dufferin-Caledon.
Well, I can tell you, whatever they're targeting, it's not working. Why don't they try targeting this? The 415% increase in seniors using the Orangeville Food Bank since 2017. That's what you get with 8 years of this government. Or the 45% of Canadians who are within $200 of not being able to make ends meet. Why don't they target them? But instead what they're going to do is triple the carbon tax and make everything even worse. When will the government stop actually hurting families, do something to help them by allowing them to keep the heat on and cut that darn carbon tax?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Seniors.
Madam Speaker, I find it so ironic when Conservatives stand up day in and day out and pretend to care about seniors. Yet day in and day out, year in and year out, they vote against everything that we put forward for seniors. Just a selection, Madam Speaker. GIS top-up of $947 annually for 900,000 single seniors, voted against. Enhancing the CPP by 50% for future retirees, voted against. Restoring the age of eligibility for OAS back to 65 from 67, which made seniors work 2 years more to get the benefits that they worked for.
The Honourable Member for Medicine Hat Couchton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. According to this member, it appears as if seniors have never had it so good. But after 8 years of this Prime Minister, life just keeps getting more and more expensive. Because of the Liberal carbon tax, Canadians can no longer afford to eat, heat, or house themselves appropriately. And it's about to get even worse from the government's planned tripling of the carbon tax. Conservatives will keep the heat on and continue to fight this useless and costly tax. Will the Prime Minister take responsibility for this cost of living crisis so we can fix what he has broken?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
The Conservatives talk a pretty good line on affordability, Mr. Speaker, but when it comes time to deliver, they're just not present. They voted against every one of our affordability measures, but there's good news, Mr. Speaker. Good news on the horizon. As of April 1st, a family of four will receive a climate rebate up to $1,500. In his home province of Alberta, $1,000. In my home province of Manitoba, 8 out of 10 families will be better off. Those payments will come quarterly. Life will be more affordable, Mr. Speaker. I don't know why the Conservatives just won't take good news.
There it is.
Honourable Member for Peterborough, Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Madam Speaker, after 8 years as Liberal Prime Minister, Canadians are quickly running out of patience and time. Let me tell you about Donnie from my riding. He depends on Ontario Disability Support Program to get by. With the surge of rent, he spends 90% of his income just to keep a roof over his house. And you know, that leaves very little for groceries and for heating. Donnie needs help. He needs a government that will keep the heat on by taking the tax off. When will this Prime Minister get out of the way and let us fix the problems he caused?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Immigration.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think we can all agree in this chamber that no person with a disability should live in poverty. That's why we are committed in creating the Canada Disability Benefits, a thoughtful design income supplement with the potential to seriously reduce poverty and improve financial security for hundreds of thousands of working-age people with disability from coast to coast to coast. On February 3rd, Madam Speaker, Bill C-22 passed unanimously in this House, and I look forward.
The Honourable Member for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, we hear more and more about spending. And let me paraphrase a little bit. After 8 years of this Liberal Prime Minister, life is objectively getting worse for many Canadians. But hey, this government might be failing miserably, but they're spending a lot of money doing it, so that's okay, right? Well, it seems like the only ones in Canada who have money, the only ones who aren't going broke are Liberal insiders. It seems like this Prime Minister, when will this Prime Minister stop collecting his paychecks so Canadians can keep theirs?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House.
When that party was in power, Canada had its worst growth ever since World War II, and that the problems that Canadians faced at that point was that there was more than 1.5, in fact, more than 2 million people who were in poverty then that are not now. There are 1.5 million people who didn't have jobs then that do now. We are leading the world in terms of the second highest GDP growth in the world for this year, Madam Speaker, and we will continue. The reality is, yes, times are difficult globally, and it doesn't feel great to lead when the world is down, but when the tide turns, it sure will feel good to lead when the world is doing well.
L'honorable député de Mirabel.
Madame la Présidente.
Madam Speaker, the public service is tight-lipped about McKinsey. We know that the opposition demanded the federal government disclose all its contracts with the firm. Yesterday in committee, a senior public servant revealed that he advised caution to all the heads of the departments and agencies covered by our request. He advised them to watch everything they write in case it gets into the hands of MPs. Madam Speaker, what do officials know that they're not allowed to share? Treasury Board. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to my colleague for raising the conversation that we had at committee. We're taking this information seriously. We know full well that the Minister of Procurement and myself will have to look at all the issues, the contracts. For McKinsey, we will continue to look into the matter, and officials are the ones who are responsible for looking at the issue of procurement. So we will be reviewing those projects with the Parliamentary Committee. Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Honourable Member for Mirabel. Madam Speaker, the lack of transparency is at the heart of the McKinsey issue from the beginning. It's not normal for the Comptroller General of Canada to advise the public service to maintain a culture of silence. It shows that the government considers Parliament and us, MPs, to be nothing more than a threat. This is serious, and it raises questions as to whether the federal government is going through the documents with a fine-tooth comb and with liquid paper. Is the government trying to cover its tracks? Is it trying to cover things up? The President of the Treasury Board. Madam Speaker, as you know, we're going through an exhaustive review of all contracts with McKinsey. Officials and public servants are following all of the procurement management processes in place. Teams are conducting their work in line with international standards of the profession, and this review will also be done with internal audit teams. They require independence and objectivity. We're looking into the matter.
King Vaughan.
After 8 years of this Liberal Prime Minister, seniors must choose between heating and eating. Sonia from Winnipeg called me in tears because she can no longer afford to keep the heat at room temperature. She tells me she sleeps under 5 blankets to keep warm. She can no longer afford this Liberal plan to triple the carbon tax. When will this Liberal government turn off the tax so that seniors can turn on the heat?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Seniors.
Madam Speaker, we recognize the challenges that seniors are facing, and our government has been there for them. In fact, Madam Speaker, the only thing tripling is the misinformation from that party across the aisle. Unlike the party opposite, who has opposed every single measure to support seniors and to give reckless advice to invest in crypto, our government is helping the seniors who are struggling. We've doubled the GST tax credit. We provide dental and rental support. We also increase the OAS for seniors aged 75 and over. We'll take no lessons from the Conservative Party of Canada, Madam Speaker.
Good job. The Honourable Member for Edmonton Manning.
Only smart people take lessons, by the way. Madam Speaker, Liberals insist that carbon tax is revenue neutral while picking the pockets of average Canadians. Life is no longer affordable. Faced with inflation, tax increases, record high prices, the Prime Minister shows his sympathy by planning to triple the carbon tax. Conservatives will keep the heat on and take the tax off. For 8 years, he has ignored the needs of all Canadians. When will he step aside so that we can fix what he has broken?
Yeah. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, listening to the Conservatives day in and day out, the words climate change just never come out of their lips, Madam Speaker. And that's not surprising, Madam Speaker, because for 10 long years they did absolutely nothing on climate change. Madam Speaker, they're stuck in the past. We're looking to the future. We're looking to make life more affordable Canadians. They keep voting against us. Mr. Speaker, we're going to build the economy of tomorrow, the good jobs of today, and make life more affordable for Canadians.
Right. The Honourable Member for Yellowhead.
Madam Speaker, after 8 years of this Liberal Prime Minister, Vera, a car wash owner in my riding, is struggling because of the carbon tax. She says she keeps raising rates in her small rural town. People will stop coming and she will go out of business. Will the Prime Minister take responsibility for crippling small business owners like Vera and remove the carbon tax? If he won't stop the tax, then get out of the way. Conservatives will keep the heat on and take the tax off.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
The member opposite was talking to his constituents. He might have also been told that in January they received either a direct deposit payment or a cheque as a climate action incentive. And it has been shown that 8 out of 10 Canadians will receive more through that backstop than it was paid through the climate pricing. So, in fact, we are working very hard to make life more affordable, and we are supporting them through these changes with utility bills and the like by helping them with retrofits, and it's creating good-paying jobs in communities like his.
The Honourable Member for Charleswood, St. James, Assiniboia, Headingley.
After 8 years of this Liberal Prime Minister, he leaves a sad, sad legacy. It's not my fault Canadians can't afford to eat, heat, or house themselves, he says, but now he's making it even worse. He's going to triple the carbon tax. Conservatives will turn all this hurt into hope by fighting to keep the heat on and take the tax off. Will the Prime Minister take responsibility for this mess he made and get out of the way so Conservatives can fix what he broke?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Environment and Climate Change.
Madam Speaker, the honourable members from my home province of Manitoba, and Manitobans will receive $1,000 in their climate action rebate this year. But again, Madam Speaker, the honourable member will know what's been happening with climate change on the prairies. 2 $1 billion floods, 2 1 in 300-year floods, Mr. Speaker, the worst drought in 50, 60 years that has paralyzed our farm community. Mr. Speaker, the honourable member and his party should get serious about climate change and stop the denial.
In this chair. The honourable member for Victoria.
Madam Speaker, a report released yesterday shows clearly that carbon capture and storage is not an effective net zero solution. So why did the Liberals plow ahead with this flawed approach, committing $8.6 billion? Well, they were listening to big oil. Hot tip, if you want to make good climate policy, stop listening to oil and gas lobbyists, who, by the way, are making record profits while destroying our planet. So will the Liberals cancel their carbon capture handouts to big oil and instead invest in real climate solutions?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
We are working on real climate solutions right across our economy, whether it be putting on a target on sales of electric vehicles to reduce combustion, be it retrofitting buildings right across our country to reduce combustion. We are taking action. Carbon capture and storage is one of the tools in the toolbox. It is not the only one. And right here on this side, we know that we're going to take a full spectrum across all sectors of our economy so that we take action on climate change.
The honourable member for South Okanagan West Kootenay.
Madam Speaker, Canadians have seen what happens when we're not prepared for climate disasters. Homes are swept out to sea, vital transportation corridors are destroyed by floods. Municipalities across Canada are asking for help, but the Liberals aren't stepping up. Instead, according to Postmedia, this government is underfunding disaster adaptation by $13 billion. The Federation of Canadian Municipalities is calling for action. So will the Liberals listen and immediately increase disaster adaptation funding?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. Thanks to the honourable member for the question. And unlike the party opposite, we believe that climate change is real. Those costs are going up, as the honourable member mentioned, Mr. Speaker and Madam Speaker. And we are feeling the impacts from coast to coast to coast: floods, fires, droughts costing billions. And that's why we launched just a short time ago, Madam Speaker, we launched our National Adaptation Strategy. $1.6 billion we've invested, Madam Speaker, 84 very specific measures, Mr. Speaker. We're going to protect our communities, we're going to save lives, and Madam Speaker, we are going to build resilient economy.
The honourable member for Kitchener South Hespeler.
Over the last few years, especially over the last 3 years, our healthcare system has experienced significant challenges. Every Canadian deserves to get the healthcare they need whenever and wherever they need it. That's why I'm proud that our government presented a plan to deliver real results for patients and healthcare workers. Madam Speaker, can the Minister of Health please update this House on the recent progress made to improve healthcare for all Canadians?
The Minister of Health.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to our colleague from Kitchener for her hard work. And thank you, Madam Speaker, for giving me this opportunity to say exactly that. That is, on Tuesday, we made an offer of $200 billion over the next 10 years to prepare the future in healthcare, but also to repair the damage that was caused by COVID-19 by giving more access to family health teams, which are essential for a truly functioning healthcare system, reduction in backlog, supporting healthcare workers, investing in mental health, and having a system, a data system in Canada that saves lives and protects the health of workers.
The Honourable Member from Montmagny-Lake-Kamouraska-Rivière-du-Loup. Madam Speaker, after 8 years of laxist policies from this Prime Minister, the consequences are disastrous. In Vancouver, 40 delinquents were arrested 6,000 times over 1 year. The Liberal government releases criminals in their communities. Shootings in Montreal are multiplying. Weapons convictions are more lax than in the past. And so when will more strict measures be reinstated by this Prime Minister? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Madam Speaker, Canadians deserve to feel safe.
Risk to public safety, they should be denied bail. At the Minister of Justice direction, federal officials have been working for months with their provincial territorial counterparts to develop ways to best keep Canadians safe. We all have a role to play in protecting our communities. In fact, the Minister of Justice met with police chiefs from across the country to listen to their suggestions on how to deal with serious repeat violent offenders and on bail. They agreed that we need lasting solutions that are...
The Honourable Member for Montmagny-Lille-Kamouraska-Rivière-du-Loup. Madam Speaker, violent crime has increased by 32% since this Prime Minister took office. Over the past 8 years, gang-related homicides have increased by 92%. Canadians are increasingly concerned. It's sad to see that in Canada, that has a reputation for being peaceful, people are afraid to walk alone or use the metro in Toronto, for example. What is the Prime Minister going to do to finally protect the population? Madam Speaker, the Conservatives speak about an increase in violence on our streets, about the increase of gun violence, but they are against controlling guns in Canada, Madam Speaker. We tabled a bill that seeks to stop the handgun market, and the Conservatives are against the very idea of this. If they really want to protect our children, if they really want to protect Canadians, they have to rally to our cause to make sure that handguns can no longer be found on our streets.
The Honourable Member for Kamloops Thompson Caribou.
Madam Speaker, after 8 years of Liberals dragging their feet on not acting on bail reform, we find ourselves here where bail is broken. Premiers want change. Canadians want change. Police want change. This government prefers to talk rather than act. Yesterday, I and my Conservative colleagues took the first step in a very long journey on bail in tabling Bill C-313. Will this government pass this legislation or get out of the way so we can reform bail?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada.
All Canadians deserve to be safe and to feel safe, and the laws on bail are clear. If an accused person poses a serious risk to public safety, they should be denied bail. At the Minister of Justice direction, federal officials have been working for months with their provincial territorial counterparts. We all have a role to play in protecting our communities, Madam Speaker. In fact, the Minister of Justice met with police chiefs from across Canada to listen to their suggestions on how to deal with serious, repeat violent offenders on bail. They agreed that we need lasting solutions that are tough when they need to be tough, but also address underlying issues.
The Honourable Member for Kamloops Thompson Caribou.
Madam Speaker, I invite my honourable colleague to go back and to listen to the Minister of Justice's remarks to this House when asked similar questions on January 30th and 31st of this year and into the prior year, where he essentially denied that there wasn't a problem. Now we hear that they've been talking for months. After 8 years of inaction, the bail system has never been worse. Canadians feel unsafe. 32% increases in violent crime. Gangland homicides up 92%. No more talk. Canadians want action. We are ready to start the process with bail reform on a very long journey. Will they help or get out of the way?
Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, we will agree on one thing, that all Canadians deserve safety and that their government needs to take their safety as a fundamental priority. Where we don't agree is that there are foundational issues that relate to criminal justice problems and the overrepresentation of certain communities in our criminal justice system. Things like systemic racism, things like colonial legacies vis-a-vis the Indigenous community. What I would reiterate is that what we need is the cooperation of all parties to tackle these multiple issues that lead to criminality in our society. When we address the root causes, such as mental illness, such as addictions, such as systemic racism. That is when we can truly achieve the goal of keeping our communities safe. Merci.
L'honorable député de Trois-Rivières.
The Honourable Member for Trois-Rivières, Madam Speaker. No doubt you spent an afternoon at the shopping centre and then opened your Facebook account to see an ad for an item you saw earlier. It's no coincidence that Facebook follows you even when you shop in person. Major chains like Home Depot, The Bay, Best Buy and many others transfer your purchase invoices to Meta without your consent every time they send you a receipt online. Meta knows everything about your spending habits, whether you want it or not. Why does the federal government support this practice?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, unlike the former government, who did nothing to modernize our economy, our government has a plan to grow. Madam Speaker, Canadians have never been more reliant on the digital economy. Yet our existing digital privacy law was just updated before the advent of technologies such as the use of social media and smartphones. In the new digital economy, enhanced privacy will not only benefit consumers, but will allow companies to innovate, compete, and thrive. That's why it's crucial to have clear rules when it comes to this sector, and that's why our government was proud to introduce our digital charter legislation, and we hope all parties will join us in supporting this.
The Member for Trois-Rivières. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'll try to ask the right question. C27 was intended to tighten the control of personal information, but it does not address this practice and does not recognise the fundamental right to privacy as recommended by the Commissioner. C27 does not require businesses to seek valid consent from customers before sharing their data. Simply requiring an electronic receipt at the shop is not an authorisation to dispose of our personal data. Will the government amend C27 to protect consumer data rather than the right of businesses to share it without consent?
L'honorable ministre.
The Honourable Minister for Sports. Madam Speaker, our government takes Canadians' privacy and Quebecers' privacy very seriously, and that's why we have tabled a bill that goes in this direction. We will continue to work with all parties in order to make sure that protecting consumers is undertaken and completed so that web users can continue to use the web.
For Regina Luan.
Wingman.
After 8 long years of this Liberal Prime Minister, more than 1.5 million people use the food bank each month, and parents are skipping meals so kids don't have to. This is the reality for many hardworking families across Canada. But over in Liberal land, the Prime Minister's well-connected buddies at McKinsey are cashing their $119 million contracts while popping champagne on their yachts. Will the Prime Minister stop wasting money on his wealthy friends and get out of the way so we can fix this scandal-plagued government?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House.
Madam Speaker, for the first part, it's been 7 years, not 8 years, and I know the Conservatives have a great difficulty with math, but talking about other errors in arithmetic, the reality for the Conservatives is they did not talk about those that were dealing with poverty. They did not talk about the most vulnerable when they had an opportunity, when they were in power. It was this government that set targets on poverty, that actually has hit them and exceeded them every single year. It is this government that has reduced the levels of poverty in this country such that over 2 million people less are in poverty now than when they were in power. That means over 800,000 children less now in poverty than when they were in power. Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Leeds-Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes.
After 8 years of this Liberal Prime Minister, Canadians have never had it so bad, and Liberal insiders have never had it so good. Take the Liberal Trade Minister as an example. She gave tens of thousands of dollars in contracts to her bestie while Canadians were lined up at food banks. She was at committee today and wouldn't answer the question when I asked her if she would do the right thing and make restitution and pay Canadians back those ill-gotten gains. So here's another chance. Will the minister repay Canadians the tens of thousands of dollars she gave to her friend?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House.
Well, Madam Speaker, of course, the minister in question has taken responsibility and has apologized. But, Madam Speaker, I have great difficulty when the member opposite says Canadians have never had it worse. The reality is we are in incredibly difficult times. We've lived through a global pandemic. There's a war going on in Ukraine. We're dealing with global inflation. But the idea that this is the worst time that Canadians have ever faced is offensive. Is he saying that these times are worse than world wars? Is he saying this time is worse than the Great Depression? Madam Speaker, Canadians are resilient. They have risen in every moment. And when
Order! Order! the Honourable Leader of the Government for a few seconds.
Madam Speaker, these are the hardest times the world has gone through since the Second World War. And they can laugh about that, but the reality is in every corner of this planet, people are facing the most difficult and challenging times that have confronted humanity in a generation. And the reality is that Canada is leading in that environment.
L'honorable député de Pontiac.
The Honourable Member for Pontiac. Madam Speaker, over the last year, we've seen a resurgence in the tourism sector. So the question I have,
L'honorable député, oui, the Honourable Member was rising on a point of order? No.
You missed this question.
No, I did not miss the question. I did it because the disruption is getting really unruly. It is very difficult to control the House and have a proper exchange of questions and answers when members can't hear each other. I didn't hear the noise. Now there's noise on both sides, yes. Pardon? Pardon, what did the Honourable Member ask?
Both sides of the House. Does the member whose party is responsible for the disorder now lose her question? If that's why the Speaker has said that I've lost my.
There's disorder on both sides right now, or there was.
The question back.
Back to the Honourable Member right after this member asks her question.
Merci, Madame la.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Listen, over the past year, we have seen a resurgence in the tourism sector. We have businesses and travellers who are resurging. I would like to ask the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Tourism and Associate Minister for Finance to provide an update on the status of this vital economic sector and in rural communities. Madam Speaker, I'd like to thank the member for Pontiac for her diligent work and for her work at the Finance Committee last year. We've seen a huge increase in the number of international tourists coming to Canada, and this means that we reached $20 billion of tourism spending in Q3. That's $20 billion in just 3 months coming from abroad to Canada to buy what we have to offer. Madam Speaker, I would like to.
Member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes.
Madam Speaker, the government House Leader would tell Canadians that they've never had it so good. And his metric for how well this government is doing is that Canadians aren't currently suffering a world war. His word salad will not fill their bellies. But what the actions of this government is doing is filling the pockets of Liberal insiders. Right. So if the minister won't do the right thing and pay Canadians back the tens of thousands she gave to Liberal insiders, then she needs to resign, because that's what Canadians demand and deserve.
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House.
Madam Speaker, I did not rise in this place and say that Canadians have never had it so good. What I said was that we are living through some of the most difficult, challenging times anywhere in the world, and that it is small comfort when times are as difficult as this, that our inflation in this country is less than the U.S., the UK, the Eurozone, the average of the G7, the average of the G20. It's small comfort that we're leading in terms of GDP growth, employment growth, female participation in the workforce. It's small comfort, but Madam Speaker, I say to those that we're there for them with programs and services that lift them up. On the other side, the Conservatives are only doing one thing: amplify.
The Honourable Member for Stormont Dundas, South Glengarry.
After 8 years, everything in this country feels like it's broken, and you can look no further than Cornwall, Ontario to find another example of Liberal incompetence. Months ago, the Liberals signed contracts with local hotels for a major Roxham Road processing centre in Cornwall, except local partners on the ground received zero notice, zero consultation, and zero resources. After 8 years, the Liberals have broken our immigration system, and their chaos is hurting my community. Will the Prime Minister take responsibility for this mess so we can fix what he broke?
The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Madam Speaker, I thank the honourable member for his question. With respect to the resettlement effort and support for asylum seekers who are seeking safe haven in Canada, we want to ensure that we're working with all provinces so disproportionately pressure that happens on border communities are not felt in a single place. With respect to his allegations that the immigration system is somehow broken, I would like to correct the record. We have welcomed now more than twice as many people as were coming into this country as permanent residents as when the Conservatives were in power. We have more than doubled our productivity, and we have returned to the service standard for study permits, close there to work permits, for family reunification, and for economic immigration. We need to continue to do the work.
The Honourable Member for Stormont Dundas South Glengarry.
The minister is telling the people of Cornwall that there's absolutely no problem when it comes to his failed, broken system of this processing centre. But don't take my words for it. Take the words of the Mayor of Cornwall himself, who said this week, quote, IRCC is not on site. They're not here. They're in Ottawa managing at an arm's length distance to make decisions about it without consulting us or hearing our side. That's not effective. I couldn't agree more. For the minister to paint such a rosy picture when there's so much chaos happening in Cornwall from his poor leadership is tone deaf and out of touch. When will he fix the problem?
Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Madam Speaker, I'm beginning to fall tired of the way the Conservatives begin their questions talking down Canada. I am proud to be from this country. There is not a country I would rather call home. Are there challenges with communities that are welcoming asylum seekers right now? Absolutely. We have worked with the community in Cornwall in the past. We will work with them in the future. The reality is difficult decisions come across government's desks, and it depends how governments deal with them. We will continue to support communities that are trying to do their best to deal with an influx of people who are seeking safe haven in this country. It is a proud tradition in Canada that we support some of the world's most vulnerable. We will not fail in their duties as the Conservatives would have us.
The Honourable Member for Lanark, Frontenac Kingston.
Madam Speaker, yesterday Canopy Growth, which is the largest private sector employer in my riding, announced that it's laying off half its workforce. And here's why. Canada's legal cannabis sector functions under crushing federal taxes and insanely high regulatory compliance costs. The result is that for consumers, legal cannabis costs about twice the price of illegal product. Now, the government has made it impossible for legal producers to be competitive by closing this price gap. Having created this problem and a robust criminal sector while the legal sector languishes, how will the Liberals fix their own problem?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, of course, many industries are experiencing supply chain disruptions, but I want the member to know that we recognize the challenges and opportunities facing Canada's legal cannabis industry, and we continue to engage with stakeholders on a regular basis. We also understand this news brings uncertainty for employees. Budget 2022 committed to launch a new cannabis strategy table that will support dialogue with businesses and stakeholders in the sector, and this will provide an opportunity for the government to hear from industry leaders and identify ways that we can work together to grow that sector in Canada. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Mississauga, East Cookville.
Madam Speaker, connection to community is a critical element of aging well and aging with dignity. But shortage of long-term care facilities on reserves leaves many people socially isolated, socially disconnected. Madam Speaker, could the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Indigenous Services Canada update this House on what the government is doing to support our Indigenous elders in the need of long-term care?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, and I would like to thank the member for his question. Chief Miracle of the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte said it best. The strength of a nation is best determined by how we care for our most vulnerable. 2 weeks ago, along with Chief Miracle, I announced just over $30 million for the construction of a new elder care home in their community. An example of working together with our Indigenous communities to ensure Indigenous elders are able to age in their community and be surrounded by their language, culture, and tradition. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Cowichan, Malahat Langford.
Madam Speaker, people on Vancouver Island have been left wondering whether this government deems public rail worth saving. A deadline was set by the BC Court of Appeals for this government to decide if the Island Rail Corridor should continue to exist. That deadline is next month, and this government hasn't conducted consultation with the First Nations whose territories the rail line runs through. Being unable to keep trains running on time is one thing, but sitting by while infrastructure falls into disrepair is another. Why have the Liberals been asleep at at the switch, and why have they failed to conduct appropriate consultation?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Transport.
Madam Speaker, I would like to thank my honourable member on the opposite side for raising this very important issue. Canadians from coast to coast to coast deserve to have reliable infrastructure and to be able to commute from anywhere that they live across this beautiful country. And I look forward to working with him across the aisle to make sure that Canadians always receive the services that they deserve and need. Thank you.
Honorable député de Richmond.
The Honourable Member for Richmond-Athabasca. Madam Speaker, after denying the decline of French in this country, the Liberal member for Saint Laurent added to it by making misleading and unacceptable comments about Bill C-13 at the Official Languages Committee. She is going against her own minister in order to derail this long-awaited bill to better protect French across the country. In a spirit of respect for all Francophones, can the Prime Minister and the Minister show some leadership and ask the member for Saint Laurent to withdraw her words and make an official apology in this House? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Official Languages. Madam Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for his question, but this is wrong. We are the first government that recognised that there's a crisis in French throughout Quebec and the country. It is important, and therefore we will continue to move forward with a bill that is ambitious, with bite, that will make a difference and that will give tools to tackle the decline of French throughout the country. Once again, we're asking all members of this House to work together to make sure that Bill C-13 is adopted as rapidly as possible. This is important for minority language communities throughout the country.
And that is all the time we have for question period. Yes, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary is rising on a point of order.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I rise on a point of order concerning decorum in the House. And like many members, you may have noticed a new behaviour that has crept into the House in the 44th Parliament that was previously not present to my notice. Madam Speaker, as you well know, members may rise to their feet to speak in the House when you recognize them. And conversely, members who have not been recognized should remain in their seat. And of course, the Speaker only recognizes one speaker at a time, and therefore only one member should be standing at a time. Lately, mostly during I'll proceed until told otherwise. Lately, mostly during question period, but not only during question period, some members, when they're asking multiple questions in a row, remain standing while the member to whom they have posed their questions has been recognized by the Speaker is standing to answer the question. In other words, two members are standing at the same time when only one has been recognized. At minimum, this new behavior is tantamount to interrupting the recognized speaker, but at worst, it has at times risen to the level of attempting to intimidate the recognized speaker. Madam Speaker, another increasingly common variant of this behavior is when a member, understandably eager to ask their question or to share their SO31, is rising to their feet far too early, sometimes 30 to 60 seconds before being recognized to do so. This, too, is tantamount to interrupting the recognized member. Madam Speaker, this is a question of decorum in the House, as remaining standing while another member has been recognized is plainly disrespectful to the recognized member. So I'm asking for a ruling on the permissibility of two members standing while only one has been recognized, and for appropriate direction to all members to only rise to their feet when recognized by the Speaker. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
It will be taken under advisement, but it is something that has been seen on both sides of the House. So yes, the Honourable member for New Westminster Burnaby is rising on a point of order.
Yes. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yes, on the relatively the same, though I would suggest that a member rising early prior to their statement or prior to their question is reasonable. I do believe, Madam Speaker, and this applies to all parties, if a caucus is being disruptive, you have the right, Madam Speaker, to dock a question in question period. In fact, that applies to all caucuses. Secondly, Madam Speaker, I would suggest that you remind all parties that during question period, points of order are only allowed on a technical basis if there's problems with interpretation, not procedurally. And if you could remind all members, that would be welcome.
And nobody raised a point of order. It was my mistake. Nobody raised a point of order during this question period. And it will be taken under advisement. Orders of the day. No, routine proceedings, yes. The tabling of documents. Dépôt de documents. Rapport des commissions de délimitation.
Report, Office of the Chief Electoral Officer.
To subsection 21(1) of the Electoral Boundaries Readjustment Act, a certified copy of the report of the Federal Electoral Boundaries Commission for the province of Ontario. Conformément à la...
Pursuant to Standing Order 32.5, this report is deemed permanently referred to the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs.
Chambre. Introduction of government bills. Statements by ministers.
Reports from interparliamentary delegations.
Présentation de
Presenting reports from committees.
Dépôt de
Introduction of private members' bills.
Mr. Fass, seconded by Mr. Caputo, moves for leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Criminal Code, Medical Assistance in Dying. The motion is deemed adopted. The Honourable Member for Abbotsford.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'm pleased to table today the Mental Health Protection Act. Now, as you know, medically assisted suicide was legalized in Canada in 2016 under Bill C-14. Medical assistance in dying was expressly limited to capable adults who have an irremediable disease that causes enduring and intolerable suffering that cannot be alleviated, and when their natural death is reasonably foreseeable. So at the time, the government and its supportive stakeholders assured Canadians that this would not lead to a slippery slope on which the scope of MAID would continually be expanded to include other Canadians. Yet not surprisingly, in the intervening 7 years, the government has expanded the scope of MAID by de facto extending its scope to those who aren't dying but are living with disabilities. And more recently, the government expanded MAID to include mentally ill persons and also signaled its intention to extend this right to mature minor children. Clearly, we're on the slippery slope many of us had warned about, and Canadians have a right to ask, who's next? The drug addicted, the indigent and homeless, needy veterans? What about willing seniors who are tired of life? Where does it end? So, Madam Speaker, my bill will reverse this momentum and repeal the government's decision to extend MAID to the mentally ill. The evidence from mental health experts is very clear. There is no consensus in Canada that the mentally ill should be covered by Canada's medically assisted death regime. Issues of irremediability, competency, and suicidality aren't anywhere close to being resolved to justify this major policy shift in favor of death. And let me be clear, my bill does not in any way reverse the rest of Canada's MAID regime. Instead, it arrests Canada's slide down the slippery slope of assisted suicide that so many of us had predicted would happen. So, Madam Speaker, I would respectfully ask that all of my parliamentary colleagues give thoughtful consideration to my bill. Join me in protecting and supporting the most vulnerable in our society. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Mr. Fast, seconded by Mr. Caputo, moves that the bill be now read a first time and be printed. This motion is deemed adopted.
First reading. First reading of this bill, première lecture de ce projet de loi.
When will the bill be read a second time?
À la prochaine séance.
At the next sitting of the House.
First reading of Senate public bills. Motions. Presenting petitions. The Honourable Member for Calgary Shepherd.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So on behalf of my constituents, I'm taking a petition on the immigration backlogs. The petitioners are reminding the government that backlog is over 2 million applications still, but they're specifically drawing attention of the Government of Canada to 7 immigration programs I won't read them all off, but I think I would draw some of them that are affecting my riding very specifically. The service standard for International Experience Canada class was 56 service days. Only 24% of applications met that standard. The Skilled Trades Program applications via express entry, at the time of the petition, only 80% of those were supposed to be processed in 180 days. Only 8% overall met that standard. And the third one I will mention from the list, new parent and grandparent super visa applications have an 80% goal of meeting the service standard in 112 days, but only 41% of them met that standard. And so the petitioners are asking here that the Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship to update the immigration system to pave the way for efficient and streamlined processes that address Canada's ongoing needs. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Presenting petitions, the Honourable Member for Edmonton-Griswold.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I'm pleased to present a petition on behalf of folks across the prairies, and in particular in Alberta, that have had bad dealings with oil companies that have abandoned their assets, contaminated assets, and have left vulnerable families like the Jessa family in my home province of Alberta with the bill. They're not cleaning it up, and this petition calls that companies in particular be held accountable, but is also calling on the government to support those families in ensuring that their assets are cleaned up.
Presenting petitions, the Honourable Member for Dauphin, Swan River, Nipawin.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to present a petition on behalf of the good people of Winnipegosis, who are forced to drive 40 minutes to pick up their mail after Canada Post closed their local post office multiple times. These rural residents are feeling punished for simply living in rural Canada. These valid concerns are amplified by seniors, persons with disabilities, and those who do not have the ability to travel. They are calling on the Liberal government to provide a detailed explanation of why this essential service was closed despite an anticipated staffing shortages, and are calling on the government to work with Canada Post and the Minister of Rural Economic Development to ensure that these temporary post office closures in rural areas are not normalized. I support the people of Winnipegosis.
Presenting petitions, the Honourable Member for Courtenay Alberni.
Madam Speaker, it's a privilege to table this petition on behalf of residents from Union Bay on Vancouver Island. And Madam Speaker, they want to draw the attention to the House of Commons about the significant risks to workers and the environment that are associated with ship recycling due to the presence of a wide variety of hazardous materials in end-of-life marine vessels. Unlike other jurisdictions, Madam Speaker, they cite that Canada lacks standards on ship recycling, on unregulated ship recycling activities, which are putting our oceans, coastal communities, and workers at risk, and that we lack a domestic oversight of ship recycling and disposal of end-of-life marine vessels, and it frustrates Canada's ability to ensure compliance with its international obligations under the Basel Convention. They're calling for action, Madam Speaker, to develop enforceable federal standards, to reduce the negative environmental impacts of ship recycling, to provide assistance through loans or grants, to ensure that we have a reputable ship recycling program, and also to develop a strategy for recycling and end-of-life federally owned marine vessels. There's an environmental disaster in our riding happening, Madam Speaker. They're calling for action.
Presenting petitions, the Honourable Member for Winnipeg North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Falun Gong is a traditional Chinese spiritual discipline that advocates meditation, exercise, and moral teachings based on the principles of openness, compassion, and tolerance. In July of 1999, the Chinese Communist Party launched an intense nationwide campaign of persecution to eradicate Falun Gong. Hundreds of thousands of Falun Gong practitioners have been detained in forced labor camps, brainwashing centers, and prisons where torture and abuse are common. Thousands have died. They're, in essence, Madam Speaker, in part calling for publicly call for an end to the persecution of the Falun Gong in China. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Presenting petitions. Questions on the order paper. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, Madam Speaker, I would ask that all questions be allowed to stand at this time, please.
Orders of the day.
Ordre du jour, ordre émanant du gouvernement.
Orders of the day, government orders. A government bill originating from the Senate resuming consideration.
8, an act to amend the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act to make consequential amendments to other acts and to amend the Immigration and Refugee Protection Regulations.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Calgary-Nose Hill on questions and comments. Questions et commentaires for the Honourable Member. The Honourable Member for Regina Wascat.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I'd like to thank the honourable member for Calgary-Nose Hill for her intervention and for her advocacy on this issue. I was wondering if she could elaborate on her comments with respect to inauthentic visa letters. Thank you.
Honourable member for Calgary-Nose Hill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm glad that my colleague asked this question. There was another item in the Globe article today which suggests that Senator McPhedran, in her affidavit, may have actually submitted the information about these 640 what are deemed to be inauthentic letters to the government in September 2021. Madam Speaker, during that time, my office communicated with IRCC, GAC, and other officials over 30 times between August of 2021 and July of 2022 on the file of which pertains to this issue. And not once did they confirm or deny that these applications or that these visa letters were authentic or inauthentic. This story here raises all sorts of concerns about who knew what in the government at what time. And at the very least, if this is true, my constituent missed the opportunity to apply for a REAL program. How many other people did this happen to? I just implore colleagues of all political stripe to work to get the ministers, the former ministers, and the staff that were named in this affidavit in front of committee, in front of this House, whatever, to find out what really went on here, because this has huge implications for the fairness and equity and the integrity of our immigration system.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Langley Aldergrove.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We're here today to talk about Bill S-8 for the benefit of my constituents who may be interested in following this. This is an act that started its life in the other place last spring, a month or so before Parliament rose for the summer. We're talking about Bill S-8. This is an act to amend the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act and to make consequential amendments to a few other acts and to amend the Immigration and Refugee Protection Regulations. The senators last year recognized a gap in our law when it comes to imposition of sanctions against other countries, organizations, or individuals for breaches of international peace and security and for human rights violations. The senators fast-tracked this legislation, which, Madam Speaker, is not contentious. I believe that it has support from all parties in this House. But unfortunately, it's been parked here in the House of Commons since early fall. And here we are, finally in February, debating it. What was the delay? What's the holdup? This needs to be done. Bill S-8 was introduced around the time of Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. An unjustified and unjust war, I might add, a blatant violation of international law. The timing of this legislation was not just coincidental. It is in response to the illegal invasion by Russia of our friends in Ukraine. The legislation is long overdue. So what does it do? Well, Canada, on the advice of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, can and does impose sanctions against certain states or individuals pursuant to two Canadian laws, the Special Economic Measures Act and the Justice for Victims of Corrupt Foreign Officials Act, or better known as the Magnitsky Law. Now, under the former, the Special Economic Measures Act, Canada can impose sanctions for grave breaches of international peace, gross and systematic human rights violations, or actions of corruption. Under the latter, the Magnitsky Law, Canada can impose sanctions on foreign nationals responsible for or complicit in extrajudicial killings, torture, or gross human rights violation. Now, some background on the Magnitsky Act I think would be useful. There was an American investor by the name of Bill Browder who worked and invested in Russia's economy after the end of the Cold War and after Russia opened up its economy to the world. Mr. Browder made a lot of money, and this drew the attention of the Russian government and in particular President Vladimir Putin. Mr. Browder's Russian lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky, also drew the attention and the ire of the Russian authorities. Eventually, Mr. Magnitsky died in a Russian prison, clearly the victim of extrajudicial killing, torture, and gross violation of human rights, to pick up on the language of the Magnitsky Law. Mr. Browder escaped Russia, and he used his influence to convince first the United States and then other countries, including Canada, to adopt what has become known as Magnitsky's Law. This law, different of course and unique in each country, gives the government of the said country the right and the ability to impose financial sanctions against foreign nationals responsible for or implicit in such horrific actions. Now, that's what the Magnitsky Act does. We had Mr. Browder appear before this Parliament's Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development on February 10th, 2022. Now, note the timing. This was exactly 2 weeks before Putin's Russia invaded Ukraine. We didn't know that it was going to happen, although there was every indication that Putin would invade Ukraine. He had done it before, in 2014, shortly after Russia hosted the Winter Olympics in nearby Sochi. At that time, 2014, Putin waved goodbye to the world, and he ordered his tanks into the Crimean Peninsula. And sadly, the world looked the other way. Now, 7 years later, in 2022, Putin was again flexing his muscles, and again, he was expecting that the world would be looking the other way. And that's the context that Mr. Browder was giving his testimony in front of the committee. Now, here's a sample quote from his testimony. This is Mr. Browder. Quote, "As we look forward to what to do about this situation, my prescription is to make a list of the 50 biggest oligarchs who look after Putin's money. There is no mystery as to who these people are, and we hit these people with Magnitsky sanctions. We start with 5 before any invasion to show Putin we're serious. We then tell him he has 10 days to pull back from the border, or we hit him with another 5. If he invades, we go after the rest of the 40. I believe this would stop Putin in his tracks, and he would not invade Ukraine." Now, 3 months later, May 17th, 2022, Mr. Browder appeared before another committee, the Public Safety Committee, as part of its Russia study. Again, note the timing. This meeting was taking place a few months after Putin invaded Ukraine. Now, at that meeting, this question, or a challenge really, was put to Mr. Browder. He was asked this: "Clearly, sir, something went wrong. Either the Canadian government didn't take your advice, or you underestimated Putin's propensity for recklessness." And this is just a part of Mr. Browder's answer. Quote, Putin, looked at our conduct, and when I say our, I mean Canada, the United States, the EU, the UK. He looked at our conduct after the invasion of Georgia, nothing. After the illegal annexation of Crimea, effectively nothing. After MH17 was shot down, nothing. After the Salisbury poisoning, nothing. Putin, was of the opinion that we weren't going to do anything if he invaded Ukraine. Well, Madam Speaker, historians will debate whether we and our allies acted soon enough, or used our sanctioning tools aggressively enough, or did everything in our power to convince Putin to back off. Maybe we could have done more, and with the benefit of hindsight, we probably could have done more and should have done more. But I want to be clear, it's not as if we are doing nothing. After the illegal annexation of the Crimea Peninsula in 2014, Canada, using the existing Special Economic Measures Act, imposed sanctions against more than 1,000 individuals and 241 entities linked to ongoing violations of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Our Magnitsky Law, parenthetically, came into force sometime later in 2017. Could we have done more to help our Ukrainian friends? Probably. But today we are doing the right thing. It's a small thing, but it is the right thing with Bill S8. We are amending 3 other acts and expanding certain regulations, all pertaining to how we deal with refugees, and in particular refugees who, when they present themselves at our border, are discovered to be subject to sanctions under one or other of our sanction laws. Our Minister of Public Safety put it this way, quote, banning close associates and key supporters of Putin's regime, including those responsible for this unprovoked aggression, from entering our country is one of the many ways in which we're holding Russia accountable for its crimes. Close quote. And we can argue about whether the veracity of the statement that Canada acted in many ways to hold Russia accountable. That's a debate for another day. Now, Speaker, I would wrap it up with this comment. I, together with, I believe, all the members of Parliament, we have all been banned from entering Russia. Oh well. After this Bill C-8 passes, Mr. Putin and his oligarchs are banned from entering Canada. As if that would ever be, as if they would ever risk being arrested and tried for war crimes. Madam Speaker, this is important legislation. It is non-controversial. It has the support of the Conservative Party. We've always been in support of decisive use of our Magnitsky Act to sanction international criminals. It needs to be passed soon, and it needs to receive royal assent to close the gap. Thank you.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. I was encouraged by many of the thoughts that the member expressed to the House, and I would concur in regards to, at the end of the day, there is a powerful statement to be made by the passage, what appears to be unanimous support of the principles of the legislation, and I just wanted to ask the member to provide his comment in regards to when you have legislation of this nature and it ultimately passes, at least the principles of the legislation, that it does send a wonderful, powerful message, I believe, abroad, and provides a message that people need to hear, and that is there is a consequence to regimes that behave against what I would suggest you are not, Canadian values and so forth. Would he not agree?
The Honourable Member for Langley Aldergrove.
Good. I would like to thank the member from Winnipeg for his comments. Yes, the Magnitsky Act sends a powerful signal to the world that Canada stands up for human rights. If you read the story about Sergei Magnitsky and how he was mistreated for doing the right thing, then I believe the world will support us as we try to do our best to support human rights around the world. And I think that this is it's a good, strong signal, and I'm happy that this is one act that we can pass, I'm assuming unanimously in this House. That too sends a strong message. Thank you.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Courtenay Alberni. No? Okay. The Honourable Member for Pitt Meadows Maple Ridge.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. As has been mentioned, Conservatives are supportive of this legislation, but the challenge that I have, is words and implementation. I think of how with a terrorist, Omar Khadr, was given $11 million and rolled out the carpet once again, and he killed an American sergeant in Afghanistan. So this is sort of problems that we have, and again, with Iran, we're all have the right. The Liberals have the right words, but they're not doing the actions as far as with the Islamic Republic regime to bring in this action, to call the Guards a terrorist organization. So I wonder if the member could just make some comments as far as what they say, what they do, and following through with legislation. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Langley Aldergrove.
Well, good. I would like to thank my colleague from Pitt Meadows Maple Ridge for a very thoughtful question. And he is absolutely right. Just because we have a good law doesn't mean that it's administered properly. And he raised a couple of examples about citizens of this country or other country that go abroad to be involved in terrorist actions and then come home again, and how are they treated? It's a problem in Canada as well, where ISIS war brides are now coming home, but not only them, also men who have been actively involved working with the ISIS army now apparently have a right to come back to Canada. How are we going to treat them? Are they going to be charged here under our criminal laws? Do we have the evidence available to actually properly prosecute these people who have committed crimes abroad? And are we going to be able to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt? These are real challenges that face Canada living in a dangerous world. Thank you.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Calgary-Shepherd.
The member brought up in his intervention in the House, how will we treat people who are returning from overseas where they've potentially committed serious war crimes or crimes against humanity. So I wonder if we could elaborate on this matter. We have individuals who either fought for or fought with or were sympathizers of ISIS, which was Daesh, a proto-state across the Syrian-Iraqi border that committed many war crimes and crimes against humanity. So we have now families who are returning from a specific camp, which is not too far from Al-Huk. About 70,000 POWs and families are being held there. These Canadians are being returned to Canada, being charged with offenses by the RCMP for traveling overseas to join a terrorist organization and for membership in a terrorist organization. Beyond that, though, it's very difficult for the Canadian government to prove crimes conducted overseas because the collection of evidence may not be ideal. The witnesses might be dead. We just may not know who they are. So I wonder if the member can elaborate on that, because that's part of the sanctions regime as well. Some of these individuals should be sanctioned, and others who are not sanctioned because we don't know they're members of these organizations. So, this is where the difficulty lies. You can only make someone inadmissible if you know what they're being made inadmissible for. And part of this legislation will need a lot of intelligence gathering. So, just putting a lot of ideas on the table to hear from the member to add to the discussion.
The Honourable Member for Langley-Aldergrove.
Good. I would like to thank the member for Calgary-Shepherd for a very thoughtful question. Indeed, it is. This creates a big challenge for Canada. The Supreme Court of Canada has just recently ruled that so-called ISIS brides must be returned to Canada. But furthermore, that even men who fought for ISIS or Daesh if they're Canadian citizens, have the right to come back to Canada pursuant to Section 6 of our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. That's the section of our charter that says that we all have the right to stay in Canada, to leave Canada, or if we're out of Canada, to come back into Canada. And the Supreme Court of Canada has just recently decided that these ISIS warriors have that right. Now, it doesn't mean that they will be arrested as soon as they land at a Canadian airport, but as the member indicated, where does the proof come from? Where does the evidence come from to convict these people under our own criminal code? The evidence is probably overseas. Witnesses are certainly overseas, and witnesses aren't going to be cooperative. We don't have the power to subpoena witnesses from overseas. This is a challenge for the government, and we're looking forward to seeing how they're going to resolve that problem. Thank you.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Calgary-Shepherd.
So I'd like to thank the member for that response, but now to continue perhaps on a different track. Inside S8, there are provisions for persons to be able to challenge them being put onto a sanctions list, but they are not allowed to appeal being found inadmissible to Canada if they happen to be on a sanctions list. During the debate on the sanctions for the victims in the Sergei Magnitsky Act, there was a provision put in to ensure that a person who was to be listed would have the right of redress, could actually challenge the fact that I've been put on the list. In this piece of legislation, one of the provisions specifically says you cannot appeal the fact you've been found inadmissible because that process has already taken place. The idea is in the sanctions regime. I wonder if the member would comment on that, where there will not be a right of appeal if you're found inadmissible to Canada under the IRPA, and that will now be expanded to all those who find themselves on one of the sanctions lists that Canada keeps. They'll have to seek redress for sanctions, but not for inadmissibility, and whether he sees this as a problem or as an opportunity to expedite the deportation of individuals who find themselves in Canada unlawfully.
Honourable Member for Langley-Aldergrove.
I'd like to thank my colleague from Calgary Shepherd again. His questions are becoming more challenging. Yeah, indeed, this legislation that we're talking about today, the intent is to prohibit people who have been sanctioned from entering into Canada. Now, there are some people who have been sanctioned, maybe just because they live in a state which we have sanctioned, and they do have the right to appeal, to have their case heard, to convince Immigration Canada to allow them to come into Canada. I don't know what how these cases are going to be worked out if we do not have the ability to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that people are actually guilty of crimes. Thank you.
Can I ask the Honourable? Okay. Questions and comments? La Chambre est-elle prête?
Is the House ready for the question?
La Chambre est-elle?
Is the House ready for the question?
La question est...
The question is as follows.
Monsieur Mendicino, appuyé par Madame...
Mr. Mendicino, seconded by Ms. Tassett, moved that Bill S8, an act to amend the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, to make consequential amendments to other acts and to amend the Immigration and Refugee Protection Regulations, be now read a second time and referred to the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development.
If a member of a recognized party present in the House wishes that the motion be carried or carried on division, or wishes to request a recorded division, I would invite them to rise and indicate it to the Chair. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Madam Speaker, I would request a recorded vote, please.
Pursuant to order made on Thursday, June 23, 2022, the division stands deferred until Monday, February 13, 2023, at the expiry of the time provided for oral questions. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary is rising.
Just quickly, Madam Speaker, on point of order, I guess I would suspect if you were to canvass the House at this time, you'd find unanimous consent to call it 1:30 so we could begin private members' hour.
Is it the pleasure of the House? Agreed. Orders of the day.
Private members' business, consideration at second reading of Bill S-208, Declaration on the Essential Role of Artists and Creative Expression in Canada Act.
Comme il est 13h30.
As it is 1:30.
Comme il est 13h.
As it is 1:30, the House will now move on to private members' business.
Orders of the day. Okay. Second reading of Bill S-208. The motion cannot be moved. I wish to inform the House that following the passing of our esteemed colleague, Bill S-208 is without a sponsor. Therefore, the motion for second reading cannot be moved at this time. Pursuant to Standing Order 42.2, this item is placed at the bottom of the order paper of precedence on the order paper. If no further action is taken by the House before the bill is considered again, it will be dropped from the order paper pursuant to Standing Order 94.2c. It being 12:48, the House stands adjourned until Monday at 11 a.m. pursuant to Standing Order 24.1.